This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
He stalked her and bothered her and harassed her and wouldn't leave her alone. This has been going on for over 50 years. It needs to stop.
A criminal familiar to Kansas City area police has been dodging murder charges for decades. His name is Robert J. Gross.
I'm telling you, he burnt my house down. I know that for a fact. We just can't prove he did it.
He's really slick, I guess, but I know that he is. I'm sure in my heart of hearts, he's killed all these girls that didn't want anything to do with him anymore. He's a serial killer. Just because they haven't caught him and labeled him that's what he is. He just hasn't been recognized as that because they can't get the goods on him for some reason.
He goes, you know how easy it'd be for me to kill you? And he put his hand over my mouth, tight, and then he cut off my hair with his other, pinched my nose off.
I said, Dad, what was going on? And he said something like, the little SOB's in there with your stockings and garter belt. He was like ready to strangle him.
I can't figure out how he's never been charged with a murder. He always has an attorney, and apparently a good one, and he goes to jail for other crimes, but there's all these murders and they can't get enough evidence to prosecute him on any of them.
My sister said, it's Mom, she's got to tell you something. And I got on the phone, she said, turn on Channel 9 News. Your friends have been murdered. They were bringing their bodies out on stretchers. As soon as I saw that, I felt it in the pit of my stomach. I thought, he did this. It had to be Robert. It seemed like one of those, like a crime of passion. The police called it rejected.
A woman found decapitated in a Kansas City apartment in 2016 may be Gross's latest victim.
The murder of Ying Li is a really important case. How about all the time? This man's 65 years old. He should be slowing down, but it doesn't seem like he does. It seems like he gets caught for mistakes, like stupid things that hang him up, but he never gets caught for the big crimes that he was preparing to do.
I just think he's slick. He's been getting away with it for so long, and at this point, I don't think he cares.
If the judge would have ordered a search warrant to go in this person's home, they would have found everything, leading this man to not only Cheryl, but to others in the past.
I can't believe he got away with this. It just makes you think, who dropped the ball here?
Gross was arrested in 2017 on federal gun and stalking charges.
We only get one chance to try anybody for a murder, and we want to do everything in our ability to make sure that we get it right and that we've got every available piece of evidence before we bring charges.
This serial killer stalked for decades and never got caught. A voice cried out in the dark, "Fire." It was a witness who saw flames eating up the second-floor apartment where Ying Li, a 52-year-old woman, lived. Li herself made not a sound. When Kansas City firefighters rolled into the Northland apartment complex shortly before 6 a.m. that summer morning in 2016, they uncovered a grisly scene. Fires had been staged in several places inside the apartment. Li's body lay in the living room, decapitated. Li had been advertising herself online as a massage worker, police learned, a clue that would link her murder to a series of crimes that began in the 1960s. Homicide detectives suspected the killer was a man long known to police as an incredibly violent predator. It was not the first time they had connected him to a woman's death, or a suspicious fire. Yet, he had remained elusive to them for more than 4 decades. And as the smoke cleared that morning, he was still a free man. The story of Robert J. Gross begins in an era before DNA evidence, at the dawn of the FBI's profiling science. It traverses Kansas City's heyday of violence, bypasses the modernization of police forensic techniques, and deposits Gross deep in the 21st century with his worst crimes unpunished. Generations of survivors, victims' families and flummoxed detectives are familiar with Gross' bloody trail of death and destruction. Women he encountered a generation ago are still terrified to speak of him. Gross, through an attorney, declined to comment on this story. For the first time, the Star is revealing Gross' darkest secrets, presenting a full picture of the longtime serial murder suspect, his victims, and the prodigious efforts of police to catch a killer. It started when he was only 8 years old. Bob Gross burned a hole in the crotch of a neighborhood girl's underpants, while she was wearing them. The year was 1960, and the first mark against Gross was set down in a criminal record. The incident with the neighbor girl was brought to the attention of Gross' parents, a mailman and a Social Security worker who both served in the military and brought a certain strictness to their Kansas City home. Gross' mother in particular played the role of disciplinarian. She could be tough. Gross hated her. He soon got into more trouble as a teenager. Suspected of window peeping, he would twice be caught breaking into homes. Gross' first arrest came in 1965. Police caught him in a neighbor's home, masturbating in the bathroom while wearing the panties of a young girl who lived in the house. He was 13. 2 years later, he got caught again, sneaking into the home of a young mother who lived behind his parents near 61st Street and Tracy Avenue. The woman, recounting the story more than 50 years later, asked that her name not be published. Living in Colorado, under a different name, she still fears Gross could harm her. In 1967, the young mother had recently moved into the house with her husband just before the birth of their first child. I felt safe in that neighborhood, the woman said. When the couple went to bed at night, they left the windows open. But that sense of safety soon faded. They heard noises outside their bedroom window. Later, they suspected it was the teenage Gross, who lived in the basement of his parents' home, just across their adjoining backyards. That could have been good window peeking, if you were into that, the woman said. She started noticing things out of place, coming home to find a cupboard open, a shade left up, or some money missing from the dining room buffet. It wasn't quite enough to call the police, but it bothered her. Gross finally got caught in the act one night when the young mother took her child to her parents' house while her husband was out of town. An alert neighbor saw lights going on and off in the house and called to report it. They grabbed his gun and they drove over, just ahead of police. The young mother, waiting outside in the car, watched her father and the police storm into the house, lights going on in every window, followed by a commotion. They found Gross in the bathroom, this time wearing the woman's slip, garter and hosiery. The woman watched officers lead Gross out of the house. Even at 15, he was 6 feet tall, she remembers. It was the only time she ever saw him with her own eyes. She fainted in the car. I just lost it, she said. It scared me to death. The police took Gross to the station but let him off the hook when his parents promised to get him psychological help, the woman was told. About a week after the incident, Gross' parents visited the young mother, crying and saying Gross was a good boy. He played basketball, he went to mass every Sunday, went to a parochial school, something was wrong, he wasn't like that, she remembers them saying. They said he had never done anything like that before. Sometime after, the woman received a call about Gross from a social worker, who assured her that such behavior was not unusual for a boy that age. They recommended that we not do anything further, the woman said. Experts understand those burglaries very differently today. An early history of breaking into homes and stealing, or trying on garments can be a strong indicator of future violent behavior. Many serial killers cut their teeth committing sexually motivated burglaries, studies show. The young mother sensed the danger. She burned all of the clothing that Gross might have touched. I was petrified at all times, she said. It was very traumatic. She couldn't stand to live in that house anymore, and moved out as soon as possible. But Gross still haunted her. Years later, while looking for a new house in South Kansas City, she made an offer on a home on 87th Street only to find out the Gross family had moved in nearby. She scrambled to get out of the deal. Later still, the woman's younger sister would, by coincidence, have her own run-in with Gross. Gross avoided trouble with police for the rest of high school. To those who didn't know about his penchant for burglaries, he projected a picture of normalcy. An A and B student at Bishop Hogan High School, he played football and routinely stood out as the top salesman in the school's annual World's Finest Chocolate fundraisers. After graduation in 1969, he went off to study engineering at the Missouri University of Science and Technology in Rolla. In his junior year, Gross dropped out and got a job as a sheet metal worker back in Kansas City. He would terrorize women here for the next 4 decades. Living in fear. Among the first to see Gross' capacity for violence was Janet Manuel. Manuel was in nursing school at Research Medical Center when she started dating 22-year-old Gross in the fall of 1973. To Manuel, just out of high school and still living at home with her parents, Gross seemed nice enough. She thought he was okay looking. He bought her little presents. She allowed him to take naked photos of her. She met his parents, an aggressive mother she recalled, and a meek father. It didn't take long before Gross' rage and paranoia started showing. Soon, Manuel lived in fear of him. Mad with jealousy, Gross repeatedly beat her, pummeling her across her arms and back. The abuse nearly turned deadly one night when Gross found Manuel in a nightclub at the Country Club Plaza, dancing with another man. Gross sat down at a table with Manuel's friends and started pulling out the photos he had taken of her. Mortified, Manuel left the nightclub. Gross followed her across the darkened parking lot and into her car, where he pinned her head in his lap, covered her mouth with one hand and pinched her nostrils shut with the other. She couldn't breathe. "Do you know how easy it would be for me to kill you?" he asked. Manuel thought she was going to die. She prayed for help. "I don't know how I broke loose from him," she said later. "I think God helped me out." Gross left, but the nightmare wasn't over. As Manuel drove home, she realized Gross must have sabotaged her car. It suddenly wouldn't go any faster than 10 miles per hour. When she finally arrived at her parents' house, Gross was there, showing her mother the naked photos. Manuel begged her mother not to listen to Gross, to make him leave. She pointed to her face, where Gross' grip had been so strong it left bruises. After Gross left, Manuel called the police. They told her there was nothing they could do, if Gross wasn't at the house at that moment. "No, that's silly," Manuel said. "Come on, take a report. You don't understand, this is serious." He tried to close my airway. Gross started calling Manuel's house at all hours of the night, until finally the family took the phone off the hook. Manuel's father saw Gross skulking outside the house in the dark. Later, Gross came back to slash the tires on Manuel's car and pour sugar in the gas tank, she told police. One night, Manuel's brother kept watch with a gun, but Gross didn't show. The family didn't bother calling police again. The nuisance phone calls and car vandalism would become familiar earmarks of Gross stalking habits in the future. Any woman's pleas for help from police would likely have fallen on deaf ears in those days. In past decades, police often had to witness a misdemeanor to make a case on it. Even if Manuel had reported the harassment that followed, in the 1970s it likely wouldn't have been understood as stalking the way it is today. After about 7 months, Gross moved on. But like the young mother whose house he burglarized, Manuel kept finding Gross around unexpected corners. Years later, he showed up in the emergency room where Manuel worked as a nurse. She hid from him. When a homicide detective came around with questions about Gross, she told her story, down to the smothering hands and slashed tires. Moving out of state, Manuel lost track of it all, but she never forgot. Even decades later, living far away, under her married name, Manuel still knows the fear. This was just the beginning. Manuel, now 65, said on a scorching summer afternoon this year, sitting on her front steps in a mobile home park in Florida. "It just makes you think, who dropped the ball here?" Manuel thanks God she survived. Others would not be so lucky.
I don't think we look at Bundy, and Meg and I had to take a break because it was honestly, it was getting hard for her to do the research. And I don't know that I could ever express how much research she does. There's new podcasts out there talking about like kind of the dawn of this type of investigating where you're putting all the pieces together archivally. And, you know, Meg was right there with that. Even it's hard though, like looking at this, and these killers are not the most terrifying killers. Like Bundy's horrifying to me, but there are people out there walking around today, and we're starting to see some of them get captured, like Golden State Killers, and those are the ones you know about. But there are killers like this that like people have no idea, they've never heard of. One that pops into my head is Robert Gross. I still don't think anybody knows who Robert Gross is, but Robert Gross is one of the most horrifying human beings of our time, and he's just recently been caught. And he is not someone who was operating now. He's been operating since the 60s.
From the Kansas City Star, on October 13th, 2020, Robert J. Gross, a suspected serial killer, was sentenced Tuesday in U.S. District Court in Kansas City to 35 years in federal prison for stalking female massage parlor workers in Johnson County and Lawrence, along with several federal firearms charges. In announcing the sentencing, Senior U.S. District Judge Gary Fenner told Gross that his history of violence was extremely disturbing, saying, "You're a dangerous person." The 69-year-old has also long been a suspect in the killings of several women, including 2 who worked in the massage business, but he has never been charged in a homicide. None of the charges that Gross was sentenced to Tuesday were related to the unsolved murders, arsons, and sexual assaults that he has been suspected of in over the past 5 decades. You can read the detailed series in the Kansas City Star. This armed and dangerous criminal, with a history of stalking and violence towards women, will spend the rest of his life in prison, said U.S. Attorney Tim Garrison. Defense Attorney John O'Connor declined to comment after the hearing, which lasted just under 4 hours. In May of 2019, Gross was found guilty of 8 of the 10 charges that included stalking women who worked at massage parlors in Johnson County and in Lawrence. He was also convicted of possessing guns as a convicted felon and other firearms violations. Gross was acquitted on 2 of the counts of stalking. Those 8 crimes of which he was convicted carry sentences of 5 to 10 years each. Prosecutors asked Finner that those sentences all run consecutive to each other for a total of 55 years. Just before he announced the sentencing, Finner asked Gross if he wanted to say anything. After speaking briefly with O'Connor, Gross said, "Your Honor, I choose not to make a comment at this time." During the sentencing, federal prosecutors presented evidence that Gross brutally murdered and decapitated a woman found inside a burning Kansas City North apartment. Assistant U.S. Attorney Jess Michelson said Gross had long been suspected in the August 6, 2016 killing of Ying Li, who was found slain in her living room. Michelson presented evidence in an effort to connect Gross to that homicide. Gross has not been charged in the killing, but federal law allows prosecutors to present information about uncharged crimes during sentencing. Kansas City homicide detective Elaine Booth testified that thick smoke and flames poured from the 2nd floor unit at the Oaks at Prairie View in the 6900 block of Northwest 80th Terrace as the first fire crews arrived. One of the first 3 firefighters who entered the upstairs apartment immediately crawled on the floor, searching for possible victims. Within moments, the firefighter found Ying Li's lifeless body. Booth said their investigation led them to conclude that Gross had decapitated Li after receiving a massage and having sex with her. Li was stabbed 18 times, and the killer removed her fingers. The suspect also stuffed toilet paper into the coils of the mattress before setting it on fire. DNA evidence collected from Li's body was linked to Gross, and traces of his DNA were found on a computer tablet and cell phone that were discarded near the crime scene. The area where investigators found the electronic items were only 5 miles away from Gross's home. Kansas City police later executed a search warrant at Gross's home and found an assortment of power tools and newspaper clippings about police investigations. In an upstairs room, Gross kept a detailed calendar that included when female Asian massage workers were scheduled to arrive in Kansas City from New York. He had also kept track of several masseuses' menstrual cycles. During cross-examination, Booth said investigators were unable to locate Li's decapitated head or the fingers that had been removed from her hands. Gross was one of several men who had visited and had sex with Li the day before her body was found. Investigators were unable to find the weapon that was used to kill Li. O'Connor noted that prosecutors in Black County, where the killing occurred, had not charged Gross in the homicide. Before the sentencing, O'Connor asked Finner to throw out the conviction or grant Gross a new trial on 2 of the stalking charges. Chung-Hui Wu testified in the criminal trial against Gross, but was later charged and pleaded guilty to federal charges of allowing her workers to perform sex acts in exchange for tips. In court filings, O'Connor wrote 2 verdicts for interstate stalking were based on the testimony of Wu, who lied to jurors. Those convictions should not be allowed to stand, he said. Wu owned and operated 3 massage parlors, according to prosecutors. 2 were in Olith, another in Leawood. It is established that a conviction obtained through the use of false testimony known to the government must fall, O'Connor wrote. Finner denied the motion for a new trial. During the criminal trial in May, jurors convicted Gross of stalking multiple women between October 1st and December 22nd, 2017. During that period, Gross captured the attention of law enforcement in a rash of property crimes and stalking reports by workers at massage parlors around Kansas. Video played to jurors at trial showed Gross walking through a Lawrence massage parlor, at times naked, while berating a worker. The women told police their cars were keyed, screws were drilled into their tires, and their windows had been smashed out. The vandalism recalled earlier episodes that preceded assaults or killings of women that Gross has been connected to in the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. In regards to the firearms charges, prosecutors said Gross studied which type of firearms would avoid law enforcement detection. He bought 2 12-gauge shotguns from a man in a dark parking lot after he removed the license plates from his car. Gross had also stockpiled at least 8 sets of handcuffs at a Kansas City, Kansas surplus store after he was told the business did not carry leg shackles. Police detectives and federal agents who arrested Gross seized a black jacket, a cell phone, a black baseball cap, and a pair of binoculars. Investigators testified these items had been used to monitor suspects. They noted that Gross did not have a job and did not work as a security officer. As a result of that investigation, law enforcement officials in late 2017 put Gross under surveillance by the Kansas City Career Criminal Task Force, a group made up of local and federal law enforcement officers. The surveillance team observed Gross over several weeks, amassing a collection of guns, handcuffs, and other security paraphernalia. The sentencing draws a conclusion to the decades that local and federal law enforcement have spent investigating Gross. "We might sleep a little better at night now," said Kathy Zay Singh, a friend of a couple who was found shot to death in their Kansas City home in 1979. Zay Singh had suspected that Gross was involved in their killing. "My heart goes out to all of his victims and their families, and it's about time. I'm not afraid now."
Welcome to another episode of True Crime XS. This week we're wrapping up Ted Bundy in a two-part episode. The first episode will be this week, and the second one will come out next week.
And when you start to look at those people, they're scary. They're very scary. That's an Israel Keys that, lived to be 60 years old. We'll never know the full extent of what Robert Gross did, ever. It will escape him when he finally is gone. He won't tell that story. It's not going to happen. He is not like a Bundy. So those people are even more terrifying than the Bundys of the world. But there were some things that we had to wrap up with Bundy. There were 3 or 4 stories that had some loose ends, and one of those is his time in California. We kept trying to look at how to measure that. But we also, we sort of thought he had gone to New Mexico, and we tried to piece some things together there. The truth about Bundy's story is there were so many other killers operating at that time. You had BTK, you had the Stalking Strangler, which the Stalking Strangler came up with this other project that I'm working on recently. And so I'm writing something it's a limited series for streaming. And it's based on someone's book, but it's not my story necessarily, but that story is fiction. But line for line, word for word, it's very similar to what happened with the Stalking Strangler. So you've got the Robert Grosses of the world that just get away with everything. And the Stalking Strangler, he's an African-American man. He comes up in Ted Bundy's story because what he got caught for happened sort of right around the time that Bundy was in the South. And that's where, so what we're wrapping up is we wanted to look at California. Specifically, we get down this rabbit hole with Bundy's car. And the hardest part about these stories is we have to tell some kind of conclusion here. And everybody's sort of covered Bundy. There's a lot of Bundy stories out in the world. When we look at that, it's very difficult to put a bow on it for us. Bundy's never going to leave. Keys is never going to leave. These stories are never over for us. But we have to sort of close out his timeline because this is not going to be a podcast about Ted Bundy. He may come back up again, but we have to sort of wrap up our side of it because that's a terrible headspace to be in. We're looking through trying to decide how we want to wrap it up, and the car is something that we want to wrap up personally, even if it doesn't come through on the podcast. And then there's a couple of cases out of New Mexico and out of Florida that really bothered us. And we decided we were going to wrap them up in 2 parts. In the first part, we're going to address California, and we're going to talk a little bit about the car. There's something unusual there that was something we needed to talk about. Specifically, it relates to Vicki Holler. And there's not a lot of material about Vicki Holler out there. She's a missing person that is on this long list of missing persons. If you look at Oregon and California, the investigators there sort of got kicked to the back of the line right before Bundy was executed. He simply ran out of time. Some of them he had declined to talk to early on, and some of them were just sort of late to the party, and then suddenly he's gone. And that's another thing that's really interesting about the Carlton Garys and the Robert Grosses. Those guys stayed around forever, and they still didn't really confess. The other stories that we wanted to cover before we get into this actual investigation that I'm doing next is we wanted to cover something to do with Otis Toole. And he's one of those that's his story never really ends either. But his is the opposite. It's Bundy was barely confessing. And then you've got Carlton Gary, who gets all these things lumped on him that I don't necessarily think are all his. And it's hard to defend a guy like that. And then you've got the Robert Grosses, who they're viewed as sort of arsonists and perverts. That's the words of the media, not my words. But they skate under the radar, and really they're these scary stalker, rapist killers. And, BTK was like that. He had this long gap where was he killing, was he not killing? So there's all these interesting things to look at. We're wrapping up Ted Bundy. there's two parts to this. So the first part is we don't know how to explain some of the California things we noticed. And Meg got really deep into that. I think that wore on her because she started to notice like women disappearing from mall parking lots, and it got very, very, very. The way she puts it, I think, is that Ted Bundy was an original part of Stranger Danger. That's how she puts it.
You got the same number of chickens as years for your birthday. Was that not awesome?
It was awesome. That was the best birthday present that I could ever ask for. You know, it's funny because I told a bunch of people, and like my youngest nephew on my side of the family was like, that's really funny. Like he totally got what I was saying. And like other people are like, oh, okay. And like my mom, I told my mom and she didn't get the correlation of the number of chicks with my birthday.
Oh, I totally got it. Like as soon as you said it, I think that's what I said back to you in the text message immediately. I was just like, that's awesome.
Yeah, I know. It really is. I couldn't have even asked for that as a birthday present because I didn't even know like how happy it would make me. Right. It's totally unexpected. And then you got a recording sign as well, which is fantastic. Yeah, it's on right now. It's red and it's outside of my office door. And like it's all hooked up so I can flip a switch and the whole house knows that I'm recording. Did you ask for that or he just did that? He just did it. That is fantastic. I know, he really gets me. Yeah, no, he totally does. And that's one of those things you can't really ask for stuff like that. No, because you don't even know you want it. But I think like his it was a really good gift. But his thinking was, I'm so tired of like feeling bad that I walked in on Meg recording and made too much noise. So it actually has like a practical purpose for him. That's so funny that he did that, and it has a practical purpose. It sort of ties to the chickens and the lights. You know, we're pretty funny people, but I cut it out of the podcast. So I think sometimes we seem like serious and argumentative because I go through and cut out laughter. It's not that I think the laughter is like wholly inappropriate, but you and I go pretty dark places to blow off steam sometimes. So I very rarely include it. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that because I have noticed that I feel like I do laugh and it's not all cut out. And like, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm laughing right there. But in the context of the conversation, like the funny parts were cut out. So I'm just randomly laughing. And I'm like, oh my goodness, which of course, like, it's no problem. I just happened to notice that because I'm like, people probably think I'm insane because I have to make light of things and trying, otherwise I couldn't do this. But I feel like I hope no one gets the impression that I don't care or like that I'm being disrespectful because about the topics that we talk about. We were talking about the little things in life and trying to make light of some of these really terrible things that we come across and look really deep into. It's just sort of my way of coping. And I told you, I've been watching nail videos. I don't even do my nails, but like it's so soothing and like I am the generation right before the YouTubers. So my child is, a YouTube fanatic. I don't watch YouTube. I watch streaming services. Like my child has never really watched television. He has watched YouTube, and then a streaming service. But I have found solace in the past, I don't know, couple of weeks watching lady on YouTube showing how to do nails, because it doesn't have anything to do with missing people or people who have been murdered. And I just find it very cathartic to just, space out and watch someone do nails.
And that's sort of why I wanted to record a little bit of this, because this really all comes about because of Ted Bundy. When we did Israel Keys, we had lots of time, and we actually had lots of downtime here and there where we could decompress, or I don't know what the word would be, but like kind of get away from it and then come back to it.
Well, the interesting thing about that is with Israel Keys, we didn't really start that case with the intention of doing anything with it. It was just going to be one of our cases. And we were pretty far into it when we sort of went back and forth on like what to do and how to do it. And I probably wasn't really ready to make the leap. I don't know that I would ever be ready to make the leap, just because it's a lot to put out there, really. And keeping your mind there is hard. And so, when you and I are doing a case and we just go back and forth on it, well, if, you say something about it and I get into a dark spot, I just ignore you for a while. But if we're doing a show that we need to do content for, we've got to be thinking about it.
Right. And so looking at Israel Keys, you had made up your mind that you wanted to do something different. And I'm not really going to do that here because some people are trying to do it. And I think your path is more successful if you can ever figure out.
Don't hold your breath.
Right. Well, okay. So that was going to kind of be my point. I tend to just kind of jump in and be like, all right, this is what I'm doing. And I think with this particular podcast, which is weird because we're being invited to different things. And we're actually I signed us up for CrimeCon to have a virtual booth there of some kind. Jamie's trying to look at the specs on that as they come in and help out. I do have a lot of experimental stuff with movie making, with audio stuff, and the podcast just sort of fell into that. And the question that kept coming up, and I know I've addressed this before, like while we're recording, but the question was like, would you be doing this if, there weren't cameras and there wasn't a podcast microphone? And the truth is, yes, like we would be. We just do it with a lot more humor, a lot more darkness. And it's actually way more argumentative when we do it that way.
Oh, we have toned it way down. I have anyway.
Yeah, no, we both have. And
I don't think you're really the argumentative one. I think it's more me because I think that I know it all. But I know I don't, but I like in the heat of the moment, I want to get my point across.
Yeah, I think you've taken that perspective because you want to make sure that the important things that you have to say are heard. And sometimes you grew up with multiple brothers, so that wasn't having brothers is not the easiest place to develop your voice.
I will say that in my house, when I was a child, the loudest one was the one who was heard.
Right. In the course of all those things, like Israel Keys to me, and now that I'm like really deep into the video part of that stuff, people are saying, this is a documentary. This is a documentary. What you've already done is a documentary. And they're not even talking about what is going on in my head, which is, I'm going out and finding the funding for more research and more digging and more expert stuff that I'm trying to put together while we're doing the Ted Bundy stuff right now and prepping to try and do like another season of this. Okay, so I have to tell you this. This is the funniest thing to me. In the course of doing that, as I've mentioned, I ended up on a movie set for like a long time now. And one of the A-list actors saw my shirt and listens to the podcast and commented on it.
What was the comment?
The comment was just, man, you talk a lot. And I can't say which one right now. I'm not allowed to say who it is, but the way that you actually know who it is because you saw a video of them.
Yeah, I imagine that actually.
And so he and his wife are here. And they're under like these crazy sequestered procedures. Like, okay, so to explain what's going on, this movie it was like $100 and some million movie, and now it's ballooned in like a $200 and some million movie. And they've moved all the sets stateside, and they're building things here, and they're shooting the movie in the U.S. because they can't do the travel restrictions during COVID, and they have X amount of time to finish the movie.
Right.
So the agreement was they bring the entire crew and cast and sequester them in a hotel for, X number of days over.
Ever.
and so like before you see anybody, you're sequestered for 8 days. And then once you're sequestered for 8 days, the only people that you see after that for like 10 days is people who are testing you for COVID. So you get a test when you get here. And when I say sequestered, we were not allowed to leave our room for 8 straight days. They brought things to the door. You could order through like a couple of like grocery services or food deliveries, and for 8 days, they would bring it to you. They provided a personal trainer by Zoom. They did all of these. So we had stuff in our room. It has been the most bizarre experience.
And you've had Ted Bundy on your mind the whole time.
And I'm sitting here typing about Ted Bundy all day and Israel Keys because I'm still like cleaning up Israel Keys stuff. So this whole experience is going on. The entire studio here is in zones. And because we're sequestered, we're allowed to go to these 2 zones. It's like red light, green light. And then the people that are like day workers for the studio itself are not allowed to come into those zones. They have to stay in yellow, which is like, it's crazy. Like, so right now we have to test every single day we come to set. We have to have a negative COVID test, not once a week. Every morning we get a quick test. Wednesdays we get like a more in-depth lab test.
And has anybody had it?
Well, like a week and a half ago, they had some kind of scare, and I think it was just somebody tested like inconclusive. Yeah. And they like sent us home, shut everything down, cleaned everything. Like they weren't taking the chance. So they sent us, back to the hotel. And then there was somebody, okay, so the protocol is crazy. We are about 20 miles from the studio where we're staying. It's a pretty nice hotel, but they put codes on our car that security scans us coming in and scans us going out from the hotel, to and from the studio. And we have X amount of time to get from one place to the other. We are not allowed to stop for anything. They give us food on the lot. They refill our cars on the lot. Anything that like needs taken care of, they do it. We're not allowed to leave. We're not allowed to hit a gas station. We're not allowed to do anything until like almost Thanksgiving. Going through that process, and I guess somebody a couple of days ago, they were on a shorter term assignment here. They had musicians in certain scenes, and they had to go through all the sequestration. But once we're done with this first series of scenes, which is coming up in like 48 hours, they're gone. They won't be back. One of them took a drive. They were like, I've never been here. I just want to drive around for a while. Oh my God. They like were ready to go into lockdown mode because the security guards hadn't seen them and like they didn't scan them in, and it had been like 2 hours. Everybody freaked out, and the guy was like, I was just driving around.
Was it you?
No.
I'm asking for a friend.
No, that's the thing. Like, so the other weird part is one day we're like shooting scenes with like 3 of the biggest stars in Hollywood, literally. So it's like the number 1 and the number 2 paid actors on the planet, and then another person who's right up there with them. And we're in the scene and everybody's doing everything. And then for the next 5 days, we only see their body double.
Oh, fun.
And then we see them again for another thing. And then for the next 5 days, we only see their body double. It has been, and then I can't explain the process because of the NDAs we signed, but I'll just say the way they're putting the movie together around everything is one of the most fascinating yet tedious things I've ever seen in my life.
I imagine so.
It takes shooting and reshooting in ways that most movies don't. It's been fascinating to see some of it and to watch it and to be a part of it, but it's also been like 9 days straight now. I haven't had a day off. And every day, this is my shortest day. And I think I texted you at like 6 something. And I was like, all right, I'm going to be able to record for a little while. But almost every day has been 14 hours long.
Yeah.
And we leave here, they time us out, we go get a COVID test, and we wait for the results right there. And then we go, to wardrobe, and our dressers get us dressed. And at some point, like between 9 and noon, they drag us to set, and we stay there till, 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night, which that's not completely unusual for a movie set. What is unusual about it is you're not going home to your family.
Right.
You're not allowed visitors at your hotel. And it's such a long period of time. Like when I leave here, assuming it doesn't go over, because they're like really trying to not let it go over. When I leave here, I will have been away from, the wife, the kid, the dogs, the house for over 2 months.
Right.
And
that's different than a normal.
Yeah.
And the reason is, well, you traveled to get there, but also it's the sequestering.
Right. Because normally, say this were the same amount of time for a movie shoot, my wife could come down 2 weeks in and spend the weekend with me.
Right.
Or my kid could come and stay a week with me. All of those things are shut down. Go ahead.
Or you could look at it like this. If there was no sequestering, they may not have been putting everybody up at a hotel, and you may not have had the opportunity because you couldn't have commuted.
Oh, that's true too. But, well, see, that's
I don't know. I don't actually know anything about this.
So the settings for this, like the actual filming locations, were not in this country.
Right.
They're being duplicated here, and that is what made me able to do it. But you're right. The other thing is, like, film people, background people, supporting characters, the main cast, the crew people, generally it's like a big bonding experience, and people are drinking together, and you've got
and you're like stuck by yourself in your hotel room.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like they can't go out and okay, so you already know that I'm basically Bigfoot, and I don't leave my house. And I think that like you and I have a lot in common that way, but we just set up our world to where if the nuclear apocalypse or zombie whatever happens, we're likely going to be aware of it because we read it on the internet.
Yeah, I won't be. I'll be aware of it because you tell me about it.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like we won't notice it. It won't change our world any unless Amazon doesn't come one day. And then that's a problem.
Oh, yeah, that would be bad.
Oh, by the way, have you ever had Amazon Fresh? Because that's what our food comes from down here.
Just through the grocery. Like, I don't have the opportunity to get it straight from Amazon Fresh. It just comes from the grocery store that they use.
Gotcha. Yeah. So down here, it just looks like, it is a grocery, I'm sure, but it looks like an Amazon thing. It's been interesting. It's been very cool. But one of the problems is when you're spending 14 hours a day doing that, and then we do have to work out because we get X amount of time a day or every other day to work out. And you have to check in with your family, particularly with like my family situation. They've never been left alone for more than a couple of days together. So I have to check in on that. So like I'm researching at night, but I haven't had time to record. Cause the other thing is like, CrimeCon is calling their fall event House Arrest, and it's a virtual event. So we're going to be setting up for that. But I'm also writing 3 different projects. I'm editing like a project that's due to be submitted like tomorrow for something else. And, it's really hard to coordinate our schedule sometimes anyways, just because life. But throw that in the mix. Like, I wouldn't trade this experience for anything in the world, but I don't know that I made the smartest decision.
Oh, well, you could have only known that by doing it. So
exactly. And the other thing is like they're paying us for the privilege. And like right now, my wife and kid got a video from an A-list movie star telling them thank you for letting me be down here and being hard at work, which is hardly the case, but like saying I understand what you guys are going through and hopefully one day we can all meet up or whatever, that alone was kind of worth the price of admission, and the paycheck is very nice. So there's that.
Well, I was gonna say, like, I understand what you're saying. I am sure it's been, hard, I'm sure, but at the same time, if you hadn't have done it, I mean, come on. There was no way that you weren't going to do it.
Oh, and there's this other podcast thing I'm working on right now with this guy from New York. I'm mainly editing, but his whole premise for his podcast is predicated off a documentary film he made that was about a famous comedian that he met right before they became famous. And the comedian said, will you come in and have a drink with me? And he said, oh, I got to go do this thing. And that comedian is now like huge, like one of the top 10 most recognizable stars in the world. And this guy has spent the last 22 years trying to figure out how to have that drink with that comedian.
Oh, wow. That's sad.
Well, I wouldn't say that it's sad as much because he really has like put a positive spin on making the documentary, but I know it sounds sad. However, it is actually a very heartwarming story, the way he put it all together.
Well, did he get to have the drink?
I'm legally not allowed to say that or the name of the person, but it will be a thing at some point soon because I've started working on it in the background.
So you can, I was going to say you can shake the camera if I'm right, but that doesn't really work because we're on I don't know, you could shake the microphone if I'm right, but is it Jerry Seinfeld?
No.
Oh,
right?
okay.
Sort of the right time frame. Major Netflix star.
Yeah, see, I don't know that much about comedians. And
well, I'm just going to cut it out here, but it is called, and he's in the movie.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
He's in the movie. Billy Joel's in the movie. Paul from The Tonight Show is in the movie. Jon Stewart is in the movie. Chemistry teacher is in the movie, and like his elementary school teacher is in the movie. It really is hilarious. Emeril Lagasse is in the movie because he like approaches Emeril to like cook up appetizers for the drink, and like he approaches Billy Joel to play a couple songs. It's hilarious. It's like disturbing, but it's hilarious. It's really good. And I told him, I was like, you got to put this movie out. Like you got to do something, because he's just on the edge of it. Like everything is totally legal for a documentary and for fair use and everything. He's had attorneys go over it. And I told him, I was like, man, I will put your podcast together about this, about how you made this movie and not give any of the spoilers away, but you have to put this movie out. People don't understand how crazy, like it. And I told him, I was like, I know it feels weird and it sounds nuts. When you told me about it, I like really wanted to check you in somewhere. But when I saw the movie, I was absolutely blown away. It is so ridiculously well done. I was like, this is just like, this is your thing. You know, everybody has a thing that's going to like to eventually do that for them, whatever it is they want to do with their world. But not everybody has like the ability to pull the trigger on it.
Yeah, no kidding. He
pulled the trigger on it and it is bonkers. But I was like, man, this is your thing.
Well, hopefully he'll get it done. I mean, it sounds like it is done.
It's done. It doesn't have a credit reel on it, but it's done enough that I was like, man, Sundance and South by Southwest are all going to be virtual for the next year. And they're going to take projects in progress, like works in progress. I was like, you should totally put this on one of those because he is such a huge name. Right. And he is so endearing in this movie. And they, like, his people told him that everything that they basically, once you get to be that big, you're a machine.
Right.
And there are a lot of cogs that aren't yours turning the wheels.
Sure. Yeah.
And I've experienced that down here as well because it's very similar. But when you know a name, like if you throw out Tom Hanks or, for instance, Tom Cruise, you throw out those names and people know them, they aren't a name anymore. They aren't a person. Not really. I mean, they are, but
sold their soul to the devil.
it is like that.
I know.
Like,
well, they're just people. I mean,
well, I know that. It's just weird to see it.
Yeah, they're human, just like everybody else.
That will be cut out of here because we're not allowed to say anything about any of that stuff. All right, so we're wrapping up Ted Bundy.
Yeah.
And we had kind of taken a break because I think you're used to like missing persons stuff, and you've like indulged me on serial killers. And I know you do your own stuff on, you know, killers and whatnot.
Yeah, I've been doing nails lately.
Yeah. So watching the nail videos, there's a couple of things I wanted to wrap up with Bundy. And that, to start off with, we went down some like really deep rabbit holes. One of those was you went down a rabbit hole with Bundy's car.
Right.
And I sort of tried to follow you down. I knew where you were going, but I tried to see if, because I think, and I'm going to say this and you can correct me in your own words if I'm wrong. The gist of it was you felt like there was a possibility that something was hinky with what was used as the identification number on the car. This is the Volkswagen Bug that Bundy drove around.
Right. So my theory was that a missing girl who was driving a Volkswagen Beetle when she went missing, her coworker saw her get in the car. Like, she went missing what I thought was around the time Bundy got his Volkswagen. And so it was sort of me, but it was also stuff I was finding, but I dig for facts. So I had found where the VIN, which was, it would actually be, because the year of the car, it would be just the engine chassis number. I had found where it would be invalid at one place. Like, it basically, the VIN number that was listed for Bundy's car didn't exist. And so I got on this whole like kick about, oh, he stole that girl's car and he just made up a VIN number. And, you know, that's what is happening there. He didn't actually buy the car. You know, he took it from this girl who went missing in her VW Bug. But I found conflicting sources about the engine chassis number, and ultimately I couldn't bring my entire theory back around because I don't know. Like, there's so much. Some things say no, that couldn't be a number, and other things say yes, it could be. So I can't bring that theory anywhere. So I just chased my tail for a little while on that one.
Right. And to clarify that, because somebody's going to at me about this and say, oh, no, we know what it was. Okay, there was no way to follow VIN numbers at the time that car was manufactured.
Correct. The VIN number system did not really come into play until the later 70s.
What we had theorized, and this is based off, like, Bundy actually did something like this where he sold the car and like...
Well, that was another thing that contributed to my theory, was when he sold the car, there were problems because he sold it to a young man who, like, when he went to go get the loan, or there was something wrong with the trail of paperwork. And then what ended up happening was the car was impounded by the police. And so I never could find where it was sorted out, like but so the kid that bought it had trouble, or maybe one of his parents, they had to get a loan and they had trouble getting the car titled correctly.
I sort of picked up with that, and I don't have anything to really add with that, but I sort of attacked it from a different angle. I did find several sources for this one investigator out of Colorado whose name was Mike Fisher. Mike Fisher did a lot of work hunting. He actually found additional evidence in Bundy's Volkswagen Bug by finding it out in Midvale. He had the Midvale, Utah police go and get it, and the FBI tore the car apart. So I was able to verify that, like, they did find hair evidence and some other, like, evidence in the car, but also they never actually, I'm going to say totally, I guess the word might be completely, verified that where Bundy had gotten the car, they never looked to see if the title was completely legit.
Right. And so and because it came up with, the reason it came up was because when he got rid of it because he wanted to get rid of the evidence that might be in it. But there's no end to that circle because the police impounded the car and then it was sold at like a police auction. And so like it was just like sort of this, to me, it could have been a very substantial lead, especially when the very first thing I find, it clearly shows that the VIN number listed as Ted Bundy's VIN number would not have been a VIN number for that year of bug. And so I'm like, oh, well, he stole that girl's bug and he's just made it up.
Right. And this is Vicki Haller that we're talking about here.
Right. And so because she went missing in her bug, that's sort of how I went quite a ways down that path because I was just so sure of it. But in doing my due diligence, I discovered that there's sources that say that the range of numbers would be that would include the number for Bundy's bug that's listed on his registration. And then there's other sources that say, no, it couldn't be in that range. So the bottom line for that is, I don't know. Yeah.
And that's what I was going to point out. Like when it comes to this chassis number being used as like a VIN number later, we could not find a proper way in our tools that we have to actually both verify that, I guess three, not both, but we couldn't verify the three things of had the FBI run it all the way down, but it sort of hits a wall and looks like they didn't. And then two, was it really a valid chassis number being used as a VIN number or not? And then three, what standards were used, and are they the one that said it was over this number or the one that was under this number? We couldn't find, because it is a long time ago. We're talking about a 60s model,
right.
model.
And I believe this was a 68 and Vicki Haller's was a 65. And my thinking was, based on the serial numbers that I was looking at, was he would have just had to have changed one number.
Right. And we were thinking that, and I'm still thinking this. I haven't come to the I don't know yet. I don't know how to research it any further. We were thinking he painted the car, changed the VIN number. And I still wonder, like, was it just such a recognizable car that nobody did the due diligence back then in a way that sort of, kept the provenance of the car intact? And maybe they did, and it's just not really available in the public. But
I would love to go and scratch some paint off of it.
Well, that's what we were talking about. The car is still available. And so the other way that this led me down path-wise was, well, if he screwed with, that kid in changing numbers around, maybe this isn't necessarily her car, but he got to know VWs and use VWs this way, and he did it with her car too.
Well, it's entirely possible. Now, on the other side of that, now, we looked pretty extensively, and I'm sure that you'll put the information in, but
Vicki Lynn Haller was last seen getting into her car, a black 1965 Volkswagen Beetle with an Illinois license plate number GR7738, at a parking lot at 8th Avenue and Washington Street in Eugene, Oregon, at 5 o'clock p.m. on August 20th, 1973. She was a seamstress at Bon Marche. She had worked there for 2 weeks. She and a coworker walked together to their respective vehicles after work. Haller may have been en route to her apartment in the 6600 block of West 27th Avenue. She planned to meet a friend at 8 o'clock p.m. and attend a neighborhood party, but she never showed up, and her friend left a note and went without her. She's never been heard from again. Haller had moved to Eugene from Illinois the previous June after she had graduated from college. She lived there with 5 roommates. All of her clothes and personal belongings were left behind at her residence, and she never picked up her last paycheck. Her car and purse have never been located. Haller's family stated she was very happy with her life, liked her new job, and had no reason to leave, but she did have a habit of picking up hitchhikers. Holler is believed to have possibly been a victim of the serial killer Ted Bundy. He was executed in Florida in 1989 and confessed to many murders before his death, but Oregon detectives didn't have the opportunity to ask him about Holler's case before he was executed. She fits the profile of his other victims, and he was known to have been in the area at the time of her disappearance. It's thought that Bundy may be responsible for Holler's murder and for the murders of Nancy Baird, Anne Marie Burr, Lynette Culver, Julie Cunningham, Susan Curtis, Georgianne Hawkins, Rita Jolly, Donna Manson, Denise Oliverson, Nancy Wilcox, and many other young women. These women continue to be listed as missing persons as their remains have never been recovered. Vicki Lynn Holler was 24 years old, 5 feet 1 inches tall, and weighed 115 pounds. She had brown hair and brown eyes. She was last seen wearing a pink dress. Her case remains unsolved.
Good morning, whatever time it is for you, it's good night for me, because it's the early morning hours, and of course my sleep cycle is completely off since the quarantine has started and been ongoing. But that's fine, because I tend to function better later in the day anyway. Now, in this series that I've brought to you that's primarily focused on most of the time mysterious murders. Some cases people vanish, so you can't say for 100% certainty that they were actually murdered, but odds are they likely were. Now, the first episode of this series I did about a woman named Rita Lorraine Jolly, who vanished from Westland, Oregon, just south of Portland, in the end of June 1973. And I discussed the fact that some people theorize that she may have been a victim of Ted Bundy. Now, the time that Jolly vanished was several months before Ted Bundy's first official victim was killed, who would be Linda Ann Healy in Seattle. But I don't think for a second that Healy was Ted Bundy's first victim. And he's admitted as such. During his time in prison, he said that he had killed people as far back as 1971 or 72. So I was very skeptical in that video as to whether Rita Jolly was actually abducted by Ted Bundy of all people. I thought, I don't know, I didn't feel like that was what actually happened. And I'm still somewhat skeptical of it, but I will say now, just in the short time that's passing, looking into things further, I'm not quite as skeptical that Rita Lorraine Hawley was abducted and killed by Ted Bundy, of all people who may have been guilty. And part of that is the subject of this second video, which involves another woman who disappeared from Oregon only a short while after Rita Jolly vanished from West Lynn. And this particular woman, when all is said and done, with all the research I've been able to obtain, and there's not really a whole lot, which is often the case with missing persons cases, I'm pretty convinced that this individual was likely killed by Ted Bundy. Now, I'm hardly the first person to suggest that this person may have been a victim of Ted Bundy. In practically every listing of people who, women who vanished or turned up dead and we don't know who did it, this individual practically always shows up on that list, and so does Rita Jolly. They both do. Now, Rita Jolly vanished June 29th, 1973, so end of June 1973, just south of Portland. Well, about 100 miles south of there in Eugene, another woman went missing. A woman named Vicki, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce her last name. Her last name is spelled Hollar. So I would say Hollar. That's how I would pronounce it. Vicki Hollar vanished from Eugene, Oregon. And this was August 20th, 1973. So roughly, give or take, about 7 weeks after Rita Jolly vanished from Westland. So they vanished very close to one another. Not close enough that, you know, you could argue they were killed by the same person in the same trip, because it was almost 2 months apart. But while I'm still, I guess, moderately skeptical that Ted Bundy abducted Jolly, as opposed to being very, very skeptical just a couple weeks ago, I'm much less skeptical in the case of Vicki Hollar. She fit the type that Ted Bundy would go after. And again, before I dive into this thing, obviously this, for me, like anyone else out there who may be looking into this, this is my perspective, this is my theory. I'm not coming on here trying to get a lot of views saying, I guarantee you Ted Bundy did this, and I've proved it to you. But I'm just saying that based on what little is known, I honestly believe in my heart, along with my gut feelings, that Ted Bundy probably abducted and killed Vicky Hillar. Now, the last time that Hillar was seen alive, she was leaving, or she had just left her workplace. She was working as a seamstress. She'd only been working the job for a couple of weeks because end of spring, start of summer, she had graduated from college way off in Illinois and had relocated to Eugene over the summer. So by the time of her disappearance, she had not lived on the West Coast long. She'd only been in Eugene for a brief while. And she left work around 5 o'clock. It was around 5 o'clock she was last seen. She went and got into her black 1965 Volkswagen Beetle in what is described as a parking lot around the intersection of 8th and Washington Street, which is kind of almost dead center Eugene. Now, I looked at this location on Google Maps, and it looks like there's only a bunch of apartments around there, so either this parking lot is gone, or the address is wrong, or it was a parking lot that was kind of near that intersection. Now, the same information I saw said that the place that she worked in is now a Macy's. Well, the only Macy's in Eugene is located a couple miles north of 8th and Washington, so some piece of information isn't right. But if that approximate location is right, she got into her Volkswagen Beetle approximately 1.7 miles away from where she lived. Her home was reportedly on the 600 block of 27th Street on the more southern end of Eugene. It was almost straight line 1.7 miles south of where she got into her Beetle. So she was in close proximity to where she lived. It wasn't a long ride home cross town. It wasn't a 10, 12 mile ride. And she was supposed to go to a party with some friends later that night, a party that she never made it to. And she had several roommates. I read as many as 5 roommates in this apartment she was living in. Probably, a bunch of people, hitting the grind, making whatever money they can. She's kind of new in town, so she's trying to sell her roots, and it's probably just one of those situations where a bunch of people got together and were able to afford cheap rent on an apartment. And because of that, along with some other things, I don't think that Vicky Hillar even made it home from work, which is interesting because it was less than 2 miles. The two locations were less than 2 miles apart. And this is because with the last time she was seen getting into her car leaving after work, it makes you assume that she never made it home. It would seem to me if she had a party that she was going to after work, she would probably go home, get changed, get ready, leave, go to the party. That logistically, that's would be probably what would happen. So it's very interesting that she never made it home, because you'd think she would beeline it home if she had a place to be later. Or potentially she was gonna go straight to the party and never made it. And I've never found an actual address for where this party is, so I don't know if it was way across town or what. And she could have possibly gone home before the party, but literally all of her roommates would have been gone, had to have been gone for this to have happened, or else she would have been seen at her apartment last, as opposed to being seen leaving work in her car. And also, I never read anywhere that the location where she lived was ever searched or considered a possible crime abduction scene. There was nothing that suggested that she made it home and that she may have been abducted from there. So she either, for some reason, didn't make it that short distance home, something stopped her, or she had decided to go straight to this party, which again, I don't know where that was located. Maybe the party could have been closer to where she left after work than where she lived. That piece of information I unfortunately have not been able to find. But it does seem interesting that she would vanish in the middle of a 1.7 mile car ride just to get home. And it is theorized that she may have been taken captive by a hitchhiker. Information showed that she did have a tendency to pick up hitchhikers, which is the 1970s. We all know how dangerous it is, especially now, but a lot of people back in the day picked up hitchhikers, especially if it was just people around their town. They didn't think it was, either didn't think or didn't realize how dangerous it was, and people just wanted to be nice to other people. However, again, if she's going straight home from work and it's only a 1.7 mile jaunt, even if, because the odds are already pretty small that she would even encounter a hitchhiker in that stretch, but even if she did, it seems unlikely that she would choose that moment to actually stop and pick somebody up, because it's such a short trip home. Why would you pick somebody up, less than a mile from home, and then have to give them a ride somewhere way over here, back there, wherever? It seemed really unlikely that she would pick up a hitchhiker in this dynamic. So even though that was a common thing for her to do, I don't think she would have actually done that. So I think we're left a little bit back at the drawing board on that one. And to this day, again, after she got into her car on August 20th, 1973, Vicki Hillar was never seen again after that. Same case for Rita Jolly. They both vanished in 1973 and have never been seen since. And in the case of Vicki Hillar, also her black Beetle has never been seen since. So that's very interesting. It wasn't like she drove somewhere else on her way home. I mean, if she would have driven anywhere in and around the town of Eugene and been abducted at some point, at least her car would have been found. She had Illinois license plates. Her license plate numbers were known. It was known the color, make, and model and year of her car. Had it been left somewhere in Eugene while she was grabbed and abducted by somebody else, the car would have been found. So it seems it's a very strange set of circumstances. She's going to stay in the city, and she's got a party later. Why is her car suddenly so far gone that it can't even be found anywhere around town? Someone could have abducted her, done whatever they did, and then thought, oh, people are going to find her car in the city. I need to get rid of that so people don't start getting suspicious, or at least if they do, it won't target me. And think about it, if somebody abducts her from her car, you got to grab them and get them away from there. You don't have time to wipe your prints or clear, anything off. So, if you pull her from her car, you get into her car, you're probably going to leave some evidence that you were there. So you want to get that car out of there, at least potentially. A lot of criminals don't even think that far, especially when they're in the midst of doing something crazy like that. So we're stuck. We're stuck with the oddity that she's supposed to stay in town that day, but somehow, either by her own hand or by someone else's hand, her car leaves the city. And the thing about Eugene is, the Eugene-Springfield area is, a populated, large metropolitan area, but it is surrounded for miles in every direction by rural forests and hills and things like that. If she had been lured even a short distance outside of that area, she could have been killed and deposited somewhere, not even necessarily all that far out of town, and her remains could go unfound, because it's just vast miles upon miles in any direction of rural landscape. Lots of dirt roads going in the middle of nowhere, lots of hillsides, lots of places people would not even be able to access. It'd be very easy to abduct somebody from the Eugene-Springfield area and kill them and then get rid of the body pretty quick, in some cases even before anybody would notice they were missing. So we don't know. We don't know what happened. We know that she and her car ended up somewhere else. Again, with the fact that there's so many hills and rivers and streams, there's a big lake just west of town. This car could have been deposited in any number of those places, and it's buried in thick, dense brush. It's at the bottom of a lake. Who knows? I mean, it would probably take extensive searching and hundreds to thousands of man-hours to ever recover that vehicle, but it wouldn't surprise me one bit if her 65 Beetle is in a ditch somewhere at the bottom of some waterway within, maybe 10, 20 miles of town. And another thing is Vicki Hillar was not what you would say a runaway. Again, a lot of people vanish because they want to. But a lot of these people are teenagers. They're running away because they're stuck at home. They can't get away, so they run away to try to escape whatever situation they're living in that they deem unacceptable. But Vicky Hillar was not a 15, 16, 17-year-old kid. She was a 24-year-old. She'd recently graduated college. She had just relocated to Eugene. So if she's going to be a runaway, well, then she ran away from Eugene and just settled, or ran away from Illinois and just settled in Eugene. Eugene is her landing place if she's considered a runaway in any way, shape, or form. And she already was really popular. She had apparently a good rapport with everybody she knew. She had a good rapport with her roommates. She was going to a party later on. People liked her. She had a job. Like, there was nothing to run away from. And so this was very strange. That this was not the kind of person that was just going to get into her car one day and drive off and leave that whole life behind, or drive into the mountains and, God forbid, kill herself or something like that. So we don't know exactly what happened. But all that being said, I honestly... And one of the main reasons that I think this to be the case is because in his, literally, I believe he said this in 1986, and he reiterated it not long, I think only 3 days before he was executed. He had a meeting with a Washington State investigator. Unfortunately, he was only given 1 hour to talk to Bundy, and there was Bundy had so many victims, known victims in Washington and suspected victims in Washington. This investigator only had an hour to talk to him, and Oregon authorities wanted him, if he could, to bring up, possible cases in Oregon that were unresolved that they felt Bundy might have been responsible for. And unfortunately, the investigator just ran out of time and wasn't able to ask Bundy about these Oregon victims. But he did verify that he'd killed 3 women in Oregon, 3 Oregonians. And it's known that one of his earlier victims, again, he officially started killing at the start of February 1974, but in May of 1974, he killed a woman named Roberta Catherine Parks. I think she went by Kathy Parks. And she was an Oregon State University student. And years later, Bundy actually gave kind of a detailed account as to what happened there. He had encountered her on the OSU campus. Apparently, she was dealing with a lot of troubling life issues. She was kind of down on herself, not feeling really great about life at that time, and somebody who might be more receptive than others to the seeming kindness of a stranger. And people who saw Ted Bundy would probably see something like that on first glance. And he actually, when he took her, he kept her alive for a long period of time. And he actually brought her all the way back up into Washington with him, and ultimately, as he said, raped and killed her up there. And he deposited her remains near a place called Taylor Mountain, where he reportedly left the remains of several of his victims, like 6 or 7 of them. And Parks is said to have been among that mix of bodies. But it showed that break in Bundy's behavior, because he'd been focusing on killing co-eds in the Seattle area, mostly a lot of times focusing on University of Washington students, and now he abducted an Oregon State University kid. And that was a very common thing for Ted Bundy to do, was to, a lot of his victims, especially early on, the first couple of years, were co-eds. And of course, one of his last big runs was this almost spree killing he went on at the Florida State University, where he killed more co-eds. So he was always killing co-eds over the course of all these victims he took. And here we have Vicky Hillar, who is not in college anymore, but she's a recent college graduate. So, she's not that far removed from being a co-ed, so to speak. And she's living in Eugene, Oregon, University of Oregon. Eugene is as much a college town as pretty much any town there is. And those are places that Bundy focused on. How did Bundy end up randomly in Corvallis abducting a woman? Because Corvallis is a college town. Seattle is a college town. It wouldn't surprise me if at some point he was maybe in downtown Portland area, where Portland State is, but it would be really hard to nab a kid from Portland State because you're right in the middle of downtown. So, Bundy went after young roughly college-aged women in, college town areas. When he was in Salt Lake City, it was kind of the same thing. And he was off and on in college while this was going on. He went to University of Washington. He got accepted to Puget Sound. He then left and went to University of Utah. So he was doing, his own college thing too. And he probably, wouldn't surprise me if he sold himself as, hey, I'm a student just like you. Come on, let's go for a ride. So it would make all the sense in the world that of any random place in Oregon that Ted Bundy might end up in, Corvallis and Eugene are two places that are right at the top of the list. And it's also important to understand in terms of Ted Bundy, this guy would drive around. One of the investigators who talked to him said he would drive around for a couple hundred miles if he had to find that right victim. And again, I don't believe for a second that Ted Bundy's first victim was in 1974. And again, even by his own admittance, he's admitted to starting killing people before Vicky Hillar vanished. And it's important and I even think it's really interesting that they were different years, but both Ted Bundy and Vicky Hillar owned Volkswagen Beetles. Hers was a 65 and his was a 68. Hers was also black and his was more of kind of a creamy beige color. But I think that's really interesting. It wouldn't surprise me if Ted Bundy would see her and even walk up and start that as a conversation, like, hey, like your car, like, wink, look at my car. If he is guilty, who knows how it started. And Ted Bundy had a propensity for, luring women, till he got them to a point where he had exclusive control over them. A lot of times that was by getting them into his car and incapacitating them if possible. And then, after he killed them, he would a lot of times just kind of he would pull over and throw the body out somewhere. A lot of the bodies of his victims were easily found, but at the same time, we have, the instances of all these women whose remains were buried up on Taylor Mountain, which is a rural area east of Seattle. That was him actually, taking remains and hiding them, which he didn't do in many cases, but he still did it. And he also didn't always just lure people to his car, because it's really hard to say, how does he lure Vicky Hillar to his car if she's already got her own car? And she's presumably driving home or driving to a party. And who's to say that she wasn't planning on stopping off somewhere before she got home or before she went to the party? And therein, her and Ted Bundy met. But again, as I was saying, a lot of times he would, some women he attacked in their own home. But that seemed to be more kind of at the beginning with people like Linda Ann Healy. And then, of course, at the end with these Florida State victims where he attacked them in their sorority house. But in between, it was a lot of luring people into his car and then kind of just throwing their bodies out wherever when he had done what he came to do. But there are instances where he actually hid the remains, and there are instances where he had to go a little bit further than just pulling up next to someone and saying, hey, can you come over here? And of course, he played one of his big things, and he could have used this with Vicky Hillar because, this was something that he was known to have used later on, which it was he would pretend to have a some part of his body would be broken. I know when he abducted 2 women and killed them from Lake Sammamish up in Washington, I believe he pretended to have a broken arm. That was his go-to thing. Like, I can't, do stuff because my arm is stuck. Can you come over here and help me? You're this guy with a cast who can't do stuff. You look kind of pathetic. And it's like, oh, yeah, of course I will help you. Any normal, decent person would do that. That's what makes it so sick, is that, Ted Bundy would use people's own sympathy and empathy and use it against them, and while he was conducting himself in a way that was the exact opposite of those kinds of feelings and emotions. So he could have easily rolled into Eugene, been looking for his next victim, and whatever, maybe it's near a convenience store, maybe it's next to a park. He sees Vicky Hillar roll up in her Volkswagen Beetle, just like he's got. And, whatever the circumstances were, again, we don't know. We don't know exactly what she was doing. We know that she was supposed to go to a party later on. That's all we know for certain. We don't know if she was going to go to the store after work, she was going to go see a friend, she was going to go home. We don't know. So it's impossible to say exactly how her and Bundy could have stumbled onto each other. But at the same time, that's the case for any potential suspect in this case, Bundy or anybody else. It doesn't put Bundy at a disadvantage that we don't know what happened, because whatever happened, happened. She somehow ended up getting taken by someone. Now, it is rough to say, since Bundy usually liked to lure people to his car, that her car ended up disappearing and never being found. So obviously her car was removed and taken somewhere. That, I feel, is the biggest strike you can come up with against Ted Bundy, because he didn't like to linger around. He didn't like to mess around. He liked to do what he did and get it over with. He wasn't in the habit of putting himself even in a position of needing to get rid of evidence. But we also must realize that over the course of his actions, Ted Bundy was like any serial killer. He was kind of honing his craft, so to speak. And if he did kill Vicky Hillar, this is back in 1973. And, when we think of how Bundy functioned as a serial killer, we're thinking about him in terms of February 1974 and on. And, certainly serial killers don't just suddenly change how they do things. Willy-nilly left and right, they tend to follow a similar procedure. But a lot of times you have to work your way to that position. Many serial killers killed, then got caught, did prison time, and then when they got out of prison, altered their methods of who they went after, how they went after them. And one of the primary reasons they altered those methods was they now realized, I have to make sure when I'm done doing what I do that this person is dead, because I can't leave a witness behind. That's just one example of why a serial killer may change their methods. So it's hard to say exactly what Ted Bundy's methods would have been in the summer of 1973, and then put them up and try to match them perfectly with what he did in 1974 or 75 or 78. So it's very possible that in this particular dynamic, if he is guilty, he could have found himself in a position where he had to get rid of that car. Now, he could have, especially if he got her away, which was his common thing. So it wouldn't surprise me if he, using the I got a broken arm, I need some help method, or any other method he might have chosen to use, that he lured Vicky Hillar away and did what he had to do, and for whatever reason, he felt he had to get rid of her car. Now, he could have easily parked his car anywhere in town.
So Vicky left work and she traveled a very short distance. It wasn't over any sort of bridges. It wasn't close to any sort of water, because it was presumed that she was headed home. But my go-to for people who disappear with their vehicles is they're in water somewhere, because it's, far more likely that she accidentally drove off a bridge or the cliff or, pretty much anywhere. It's far more likely that occurred with her vehicle than it is Ted Bundy was waiting. He had slashed her tires and was waiting on her to come out and, help her, and, how that ends up. But I am usually very dismissive, and I'm lobbying for it not to be his victim, and I just really couldn't get there with her. Like, she left a lot of questions in my mind, and I think it's because of the car.
Well, she was in a little department store, like in a mall.
Right.
That was the other thing. And we kind of drilled down and looked at the different paths. Like you said, like we looked for water, and I tried to find a way for us to go back in time and see if there were any like filled in area ponds or something.
Well, if you remember, I think it was only like 7 miles. I mean, it wasn't a very long path at all. Like there was like, but the other part of that is maybe she wasn't headed home. Maybe she was going elsewhere.
And does take her to water within about double that time, like 10 minutes.
Right. And so, who knows? I mean, we don't know. It was just assumed that she was going home. And based on that, I don't see how she could have ended up in water without a pretty substantial detour. He stole her car and painted it, and, you know, he's done all this stuff. And I couldn't get enough factual information to really like propose that as a solid lead. But I haven't completely discounted it. I would totally, I mean, he would absolutely steal somebody's car. I have no question. He did steal people's cars. I mean, and the situation, as we were kind of, you know, watching this this story unfold, which happened in the 70s, you know, we have Carol Durange's account of what happened. And so there you've got a girl at a mall who there's an issue with her car. And
Wait, can I just point something out here, or will it throw you off?
Go ahead.
You went further than that. You actually found some of the transcripts from Carol Durange's interview. And we had talked about this with the Fort Worth Trio because they happened in the same year, just a couple months apart. You pointed out that in her initial interview, Carol Durange said that when she was approached,
parking lot.
It was the Sears parking lot.
Right, which the Fort Worth Trio, like the note that was sent back to the husband, it said the car is in Sears upper lot.
Right. So there was something to be said for that. And then I don't want to interrupt you because you went on this whole thing with the shopping center idea that I think you're getting to now, and I want you to have some space to talk about that.
I was wrong. No, I'm just kidding. Let's see. So so we get this picture because there is a witness with Carol Durange. She gives an account of what happened. And so basically as I've been doing this case, what that has led me to do is I'm thinking to myself when I'm reading about missing girls, proximity-wise and time-wise, it's even a remote possibility that they could be Ted Bundy's victims. And so anytime I'm looking at a young, pretty girl who was in the vicinity of a shopping center and, you know, her vehicle was involved to some extent, she was either leaving in it or it was left behind or what have you, I immediately think, well, that she could absolutely be Ted Bundy's victim because he used that type of scenario.
And where we got sort of waylaid, where we can't give specific answers, is he has all these victims he talks about in California that nobody has ever really put a pin on. And it even extends upwards, it even extends northward into like Oregon, that we were able to find in this time frame from, I think we looked at 1967 to about 1974 just to see there were a lot of women disappearing from malls in there, and it was sort of shocking.
There really are. And so part of my sort of disbelief with like the whole Bundy situation, which, you know, I've talked about at length as far as him just being this, you know, historical serial killer, it is unbelievable the amount of possible victims, because if you look back through history, there'll be missing people here, they're scattered about. But during this particular time, and I've said before, it wasn't all Bundy, but all of a sudden, like all of these young women start going missing in the Pacific Northwest. And it's the craziest thing because it suggests that Bundy really did have a lot of victims. And I think it's really bad. I don't know that they knew how many victims they were possibly dealing with when they put him to death. But, you know, if he really is responsible for all the girls who were missing, then it's really bad. It's terrible. However, if he's not, what was going on that made this spike in the Pacific Northwest during that period of time that it's not repeated?
It's multiple killers. It's multiple unsolved cases that could be linked to known killers or unknown killers. And we sort of look at it. It's funny because you developed a list for this, and I thought it was going to have 30 names on it, but you actually ended up with hundreds of names that you started whittling down. Just you could rule out a lot of them, but there were still a huge amount of unsolved cases from Washington sort of down the West Coast in the right time frame. It was actually really scary.
And so in those cases, whenever I was reading about the circumstances of their disappearance for what was available, it was amazing to me. There are a lot of possibilities of girls who were in situations where Bundy could have used his typical ruse, whether it be, I'm hurt, help me, or I'm a law enforcement officer, let me assist you because your car's being broken into, or whatever he did. I don't feel like that MO was being used by the other killers operating. I mean, you've got other serial killers that are doing other things, but they lacked Bundy's sort of, I don't know, his,
bravado? Is that what you mean?
Like his smoothness and it's one thing, hitchhiking girls, of course, they could be picked up by anybody.
Yeah, Kemper did that, prostitutes were easy prey. There's a lot of killers that focused on those.
But if you look at, there's some of those men, some of the serial killers that we know were operating, Bundy would be the most likely that a young girl at the mall would sort of go along with without question. Because he didn't look scary.
Appearance-wise?
Yeah, he looked like a normal guy. And then when he puts on top of it that he's either, in need of assistance or trying to assist from a place of authority, then he becomes even more likable, right? I mean, but just based on his outward appearance. Now, some of the other men, well, for one thing, they didn't operate that way. They weren't getting girls from shopping centers. And another thing was, they wouldn't have, the girls that ended up being missing wouldn't have just walked off with these guys.
Right. Well, and a lot of them were not as crafty, I guess might be the word. But I want to point out that he's not very charming overall. It's superficial.
I'm not saying, oh yeah, he has no personality, but I'm just saying, based on looks alone, Bundy could absolutely make himself look harmless. He wasn't very tall. He wasn't very intimidate. His size wouldn't have been an intimidating factor about him. People say, oh, he was so handsome. I mean, I guess if that's your type, but I can sort of, deduce that he would have been clean. He would have been wearing nice clothes. He would have had, unless he had just completed one of his crimes, he would have had a put together appearance that would have, could have falsely led somebody to believe that he was an okay person. And I'm not, I hardly ever look put together anymore these days, but I'm just saying, to the extent that when you have a guy walk up and he looks like some of these other serial killers, you run the other way. you don't stop to help him,
Well, even the thing that really gets me about Bundy is it's not I agree with you. He had these, he sort of got everyday looks. He could just sort of blend in, and he's almost chameleon-like, but I couldn't tell if he was doing it on purpose or if it was just him trying not to stand out. But what's interesting about Bundy is not that. It's having the ability to walk up to a girl or a woman or a man, who knows, and say, hey, I need help with this thing, knowing full well that he is putting on just enough of a display that when he goes for the big reveal, that change is instantaneous from I needed your help to clunk, you were hit on the back of the head and you are now my thing that I own.
It's insane.
That's the part where people go, oh, he's charming. I mean, superficially, I suppose that would come across as charming, but to me, that's terrifying. Because
because it was like a switch, like just.
It's literally a switch.
And I don't find him. I never, like, from what I've seen, I've never considered him to be charming. Of course, we know from our perspective that he was a serial killer and a really terrible serial killer. And so that could be part of why I wouldn't, I didn't find him charming. Now, to run into him on the street, I feel like I probably would have been like, what does this babbling idiot want? That's kind of the impression I get.
My approach would probably be I would find him obnoxious.
Right. And so I can see, though, where being a polite young girl, they would make really good targets for him. We talked about sort of with Keys, we talked about like how girls react to things. And so he was literally looking for the girls that they might have thought badly of him, but they wouldn't have been rude. Like they would have helped him. They would have assisted him. And I think he sort of adjusted accordingly.
I agree with you. And I think they probably in their head were thinking, oh, well, I can walk from here to there. It's perfectly lit, blah, blah, blah. I'm in a parking lot. And even if they questioned him, would have thought, well, I'm just not going anywhere with that guy. And they didn't realize that he was going to basically take a wrench out of his cast or his pocket or his sling or whatever he was doing that day. And, he was going to clip him at just the right moment that it would render them unconscious in his vehicle, and they wouldn't even realize it.
Right. And I have to say that probably would have worked on me. I mean, honestly, I can't imagine a situation where being around the age of the victims that I wouldn't have rendered assistance if asked, regardless of how he looked. It wouldn't have even mattered. So my whole theory just went sort of out the window because I said the girls wouldn't walk off with somebody who looked, disheveled and not put together like the other serial killers. But honestly, something like that, I would help somebody. And Bundy knew that, and he was preying on that, like that instinct that girls have, that polite young girls have. I would have fallen for it.
Yeah, if it was just him saying, hey, we're at the entrance of this whatever, and I need help at my car in the parking lot right there. Yeah, I don't know that there are a lot of people that really, this sounds crazy to say, but the type of people that would have avoided being,
they're kind of mean.
They're kind of assholes. So, I mean, and I'm the same way. I'm polite as well. Like I'm always willing to help to a point. And I just don't think I would be a desirable victim for Bundy.
So for the longest time when we were doing Keys, I was like, oh yeah, Keys is totally responsible for all of these missing girls like in my lifetime, and he is the boogeyman that I've been afraid of. Then I was like, oh, well, the reason that everybody was always like so freaked out about girls getting abducted, that is all on Ted Bundy. I mean, because he was the one abducting girls from malls and making girls out in the world feel like harm could come to them.
And that's all for part one of our Ted Bundy finale. But after the closing credits, I am going to play the final interview of the Stocking Strangler. It's definitely worth a listen to hear how different it was from Ted Bundy's final interviews.
Thanks for joining us. You can reach us at 252-365-5593 or at truecrimexcess.com or truecrimexcess@gmail.com if you want to send us a note. This episode was brought to you by LabrottieCreations.com. That's LabrottieCreations.com. Check out the merchandise and specifically their fun Pop Pet art custom pieces made from photos of your very own pets. Use the promo code CRIMEXS, that's CRIMEXS, for 20% off a fun, brightly colored, happy piece of art of your own pet at their site, LabrottieCreations.com. Music in this episode was licensed for True Crime XS. The theme song was Indestructible by Noah Smith. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform or at TeePublic, Instagram, or Twitter. You can also join us on Patreon to fund future body exploration trips. But the best thing you can do for us is leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform and share us with your friends. And we'll see you next time.
This is True Crime XS.
What brings you close to me? Look for this, Carlton?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So, first of all, I just wanted to ask you how you're feeling today.
I'm fine. I'm blessed.
And tell me why you wanted to talk to me today.
Well, it's far too much stuff that's going on that have not been reported. And I'm an innocent person. Actual innocence should be, according to U.S. Supreme Court, that's enough to get people off death row. So my thing is that the message is not getting out. A lot of people are not going to courtrooms. They're reading stuff that's been edited, in papers and everything, and they get part of the story. Whereas I think that if people get the real story, then we would have this problem.
And what's the real story?
Well, the real story is that from the very beginning, this thing has just been one-sided. From the very beginning, from the arrest home, you would never find another case like this where I had not one dime for an expert from the beginning, while the state had everything they had at the taxpayers' expense. They had all of the money, all the experts they wanted, and they opposed every motion that we put in. Although the judge declared me indigent, that I needed the money, but they would not give me the experts from the beginning. Then they lied from the very beginning of the arrest because I had no idea what I was arrested for. That's why I'm smiling in the very first photo. People see me coming down the hall with the red sleeveless top on. They thinking I've lost my mind because I'm accused of these cases, but I'm smiling. Well, I'm smiling because I don't know I'm accused of these cases. I'm thinking it's because of the South Carolina when I absconded from South Carolina.
Right.
Because up there was a big case, a so-called steakhouse bandit case. So I had no idea. And that's why they're lying, because I always told lawyers from the beginning, I said they had a tape recorder in the car. He was on the back of the seat. And they were talking to me about it. The reason they lied about it, because the only thing that's on that tape is me talking about going back to South Carolina. They didn't mention anything about these lies about I went to talk about the case, I don't need a lawyer. They did mention South Carolina, but that's all. That's why they don't play the tape. So all of these years they lied about the tape until a recent hearing after Jack Martin, was able to pull this out. And Rowe finally admitted, oh yes, that's right, I did have a tape in my pocket, but it was not on. Well, if you look at it, they had already said from the beginning, we're not going to question this man. We're just going to pick him up from Albany, Georgia, and we're going to bring him back to the jailhouse, to the detective division or whatever, and then we'll talk to him. Well, if you were not going to question me, why would you have a tape recorder in your pocket, and why would you not going to use that tape recorder? What was the point in that?
Right.
So I had been on cocaine, and they took pictures of the room. The police had watched me go to the store, and we went to the store and we purchased alcohol. I don't drink alcohol normally, so I had been on cocaine binge for a while. They found some cocaine in a female companion of mine refrigerator over in Alabama, and I talked to the guy on the telephone, CID or somebody, and he said, man, from what other people telling me, you're a different guy from what these people here telling me. So I said, well, look, that's my cocaine. So they know I've been on cocaine for like a week or so. So when I get arrested, I'm on this. And I had drank this beer. They took pictures of it in the room. So, but they're talking to me. So when I get back up in here, they talking to me, and I'm withdrawing. I'm really withdrawing. So they do put me in the car. But I promise you, my head was on the back of the thing back there. I didn't point out nothing. Those places were not integrated when I was growing up. My wife was from there. Those areas were not integrated at all. There's no way in the world I would be able to pick out each one of these houses where a single elderly white woman lived that's from an affluent family. There's no way I could do that, or nobody that's never been in those areas. So they lied about that. And think about this. If I was going to refuse to be recorded, well, why didn't they sign the so-called confession? Neither one of the police signed it. Neither one of them initialed it. They presented to the jury an unsigned, uninitialed, something that somebody wrote down. They pared it down from 12 pages to 3 pages. What happened to the other pages that was missing now? And in the pared down version, they got pasted over. And if you get fit that version as Dr. DeClue did and show what I allegedly said as opposed to what they claim Jerome Lively said. There's no facts in what I allegedly said. They are saying that I said this was the house, but there's nothing there to say there was that box over that corner, and that box was not there when we came into this house. But in his alleged statements, there's all kind of facts in there. So it's either that he did the case or the police are lying.
Because you never confessed to them.
I'm sorry?
You never confessed to them.
I have not.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely not. You know, we talked about South Carolina. We talked about the robberies I had in Albany, Georgia. We talked about the robberies I had in Columbus. I didn't find out what I was charged with until I got on the telephone, and I called my companion at the time in Augusta, Georgia, Jennifer Slater, who's from Columbus. I called her up, and I said, listen, I suppose I'll be back in South Carolina in a couple of days or so. And she said, no. I said, what do you mean? I said, get the lawyer. I'll be back in a couple of days. It's just astounding to carry 1 year. And she said, no, they got you for murder. And I'd like to sell out. So that's why I also asked the police, the lawyers, I said, get the detective division, get the phone records from there. See what time I placed this call. Because before that time, they had me chained to a desk by my leg. And they had the lady that was arrested with me, Robin Odoms, they had her in another room somewhere. And they was threatening me that if I don't say this, she'll never see her child anymore. They're going to send her to prison. People well aware of these police tactics. This is nothing new, especially when it's unrecorded.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So then they want to say they didn't have access to it. Okay, so yeah, we went out into the neighborhood, but they was pointing out. And then when you get to trial, they lie about Sellers, Rowe, and Borum did not know. But lo and behold, today, you know, as today we find out the stuff that's in the box. I got like 14 different documents where these guys was actively in the neighborhood questioning people about these cases. That's Sellers, and that's Rowe. Rowe's on the task force. Although Ryan Bill Smith get on the stand and tell these people that these people didn't know anything about these facts, that these facts had to come from me. But nobody's saying, well, let's look at these documents. Of the ones that's looking at the documents, they just glide over and cast them to the side. You see? So after this thing, we go in the neighborhood, they bring me back, and they keep me chained. I can't call anybody unless it go through them. So they lock me in this room, and I'm on like this place in this cell down there in this room, in this jail, Muskogee County Jail. Then they come back later. So by this time, my mom and I got this lawyer come down, so don't say anything. He called Judge Land and all that. They swept that under the rug. They took a sample from me. Okay? They came back a couple of days later and took another sample. My question is, what happened to the first sample? They were saying that was inadequate. Inadequate why? But the lawyers had come and said they were shouting. So you can let it go home. I said, what are you talking about? They said because the stuff come back and you are secreted, it doesn't match you. That was like the second day. So that's why they took another sample. Nobody said, well, what happened to that sample? Okay. So from this time, we get up in there, and this fool's talking about, I told him something about I could tuck my toes under in a shoe. I wear a size 14. Okay, but that night, I signed a consent to take the bare feet print. Even if I could put my foot in a smaller shoe, what would you say about the barefoot print? How could I make that smaller?
Right.
That's not possible. Okay, in some of them houses, when my regional lawyer, Bud Seaman, asked them, said, is it usual that you take bare feet prints from suspects? And the answer was no. So why did y'all take these bare feet prints? You know the houses, Miss Woodland house was one of them, and another house. So they had the barefoot and they had the shard print. They still come out the same way. So they lied about that. So here it is, allegedly. I agreed to talk for hours. I agreed for you to take hair, blood, semen, hair, blood, and saliva. I agreed to drive around in the neighborhood to point out all these houses to you. I agreed to do all of this, but when it comes down to recording the conversation, I said no. Now, where does that come from? And then, like I said, even if I said no, what about them? Why didn't they sign it? Who goes home and sit at the table hours later and write down some kind of fictitious thing that they put down and come back and say that that's even John Land, the ex-senior judge, who was the judge original on this case, said he's never seen that before. You, in your investigative thing, you'll never find another case like that. Who goes home to do that? because he was tired. Well, these police were tired. They said they had been looking for me for hours. They had not been asleep. They had all this political pressure on them to solve this case. I was not the first person that they falsely accused of that. So again, back to the libelous question. They said the GBI, not Carlton Garrett, the GBI said the hair matched libelous. The GBI said the non-secretive status matched libelous. The GBI, the Columbus Police, the DA, all of them said the statements that he allegedly gave, confessing to Miller, confessing to Diamondstein, confessing to Jackson, that those facts were facts. The police testified on the stand that we didn't say that Jerome Libus did tell us that. So again, what I said initially, it's got to be either he did tell them that or he did not tell them that. But one way or another, they are facts that the police acquiesced to. They said that's true. So who's lying about that?
Mm-hmm.
It could have been, if he said that later, and he could have went back upstairs, or wherever he was locked at, it could have dawned on him, I messed up. So then he could have been talking crazy. Well, yeah, I kidnapped the Lindbergh baby. Does that mean that originally he was not telling the truth? He could have been.
Yeah.
Okay, so then when we get back to all this other stuff, now we come down to the DNA and all this stuff. Now, how are you going to murder somebody and you people destroy the evidence? You took all the stuff out of these envelopes and everything. Carlton Garrett never refused to have anything tested. The state of Georgia did. They opposed us going to the Georgia Supreme Court. They opposed that thing to have DNA taken. They opposed that. After the Georgia Supreme Court approved that and got back to the Superior Court in Muscogee County, they opposed that. They opposed us getting any experts from the beginning. They opposed us getting any money for any of that stuff from the beginning. They opposed any of the testing from the beginning and during this time on the extraordinary motion. They opposed that. Then they said, well, we'll agree on this lab. It's not like Dr. M. Pickens went in there and picked this stuff. Julius Slater went in there with him. They picked it. I didn't ever pick up a particular thing to be tested. I said test it all. So they went in and picked that. And the Bodie lab agreed on in court. We read it now, Your Honor, is what the state said. So they went on and tested it. When it's come back in the Miller sample, it clearly does not match me. Now they want to say it's a secondary case I'm not charged with. But at the same time, you want to claim the Diamondstein case that I'm not charged with. You want to push that ahead. That cannot be contaminated. But when the other samples come back that did not match me in the Thurman cases, you want to say that this case was contaminated. Well, if it's contaminated for me, it can be contaminated against me. And what they're telling the public is not the whole story. When the lady in the courtroom stood up from the Bodie lab, it was clear that all of the alleles did not match up. The alleles are the points when you're matching DNA, which I'm sure you guys as investigative reporters know all about that. So the FBI, I think they pushed from 15 to 21. If one of the alleles does not match, that simply means that it's not the person.
Mm-hmm.
You could have 20 alleles line up if one or two does not match. According to them, not Carlton Garrett's theory, but according to them, that means that it's not a match. So that's what happened in the courtroom. There was no confirmation match. And then the question came over, why is that? We don't know. When we went back, the envelopes were empty. Why was the envelope empty? You can't, one side or the other can't use up all of the evidence and expect the other side just to take that as gospel because they said it came out this way, because I assure you, had the defense done it, they would not have accepted it. They would have been crying just like we were saying, like, that's not fair.
Right.
And that's not what the law is. On spoliation, you're not supposed to use it. When that happened, it's an assumption that the side that's responsible for that is guilty. They're hiding something. Why that? They oppose everything. So that's not a confirmation on that. And then also, if that was a confirmation, what about the other 7 to 8 cases? They was in there doing Cody's thing. So if it came back for Diamondstein, why didn't it come back for the rest of them?
Right.
So now, when they try that, that's another excuse. This excuse of then we get to the bite mark, the mold. First and foremost question, why would a regular dentist that has nothing to do with the Columbus Police Department, why would you go to that dentist to have him to hold these molds? Not one mold, but 3 molds. We only knew about the one until later when the guy testified in court. So why would a regular dentist, not associated with the police department, oh, that's right, he's best friends with Doug Pullen, who was the assistant DA at that time, who's now with the judge until the Judicial Qualification Committee to come in and let him ease out the back door with the racist stuff. So somebody could answer that for me. Who does that? Do you think if I got a gun in a case that was involved, I'm going to take that gun and give it to Jessica Knoll to hold that? When I got the police department, they got a property room. I'm the DA. I got a safe down there. Why would I give this to a guy that's not even associated with the Columbus Police Department? Okay, all those moles are still missing. When we find this one mole, they run up to Atlanta and get Dr. Thomas David, the GBI guy, well-known forensic odontologist, the only one in the state, at least at that time. He identified the unfortunate victims in Hurricane Katrina, the unfortunate victims in 9/11. They called him in to identify these people. He's been doing this for ages. When they go to him, they try to get him to say, well, look, he said, I can tell you what, I can look at the person's mouth, and I can tell you whether or not that's him because the teeth are that bad. He said, and if y'all go get a court order, we can take a cast of his mouth or a impression or whatever, and then that'll substantiate it even more. So they asked him, look, is there some way that if it exclude him, would you say something different? By the grace of God, Dr. Davis said, no, I'm not going to testify to that. So guess what? They didn't show no more. They did not come back to him. Dr. Davis said he did not even realize what was going on until he saw it in the paper, that they was trying to murder me before. So how could they do that? They didn't come back and talk to me. Why not? You sought him out first. I didn't ask you to pick Dr. Davis. He worked for the GBI. He doesn't work for me. You chose him, but when that man has scruples and said, I'm not going to play this good old boy racist thing, I'm not going to lie on this man, I'm not going to lie for him, I'm not going to lie against him. That's all I've ever asked. I don't want nobody lying for me. I could have had plenty of people to come up there and lie for me with alibis, and all kind of friends would have said I was here, I was there, but I did not do that. So, now the other two moles are missing. They took the one mole around. When he takes the microscope, stereo microscope, which enhances stuff, and he do that. That's what he do. He went to school for this stuff. And when he get to court, and he explained this to the judges, they questioning him. The judge have no experience, nothing to do with dental stuff, medical or anything like that. He took over the hearing, just took over the entire hearing. The state didn't have to say anything. This is record stuff. He took over the hearing and questioning this man, and then they go back to the dentist. He said, well, are you a forensic dentist? He said, no, I'm just a plain dentist. Did you use a stereo microscope at the GBI crime lab? I did not. So you just look at naked eyes. See, I just took it above the breast. The question was, a person with teeth, how do you bite a breast without leaving a bite mark above and below? How do you do that? That's not possible, I don't think. So he said, I used a stereo microscope, and that's what it shows right here. But he had already told him that before he used that. He said his lower teeth right here, and one of those teeth were rotated. To correct a rotated tooth, I asked the dentist here, Dr. Barron, how would you do that? You got to take that tooth out because you put braces on there straight at it? He said, no, that whole thing would have to be removed. So then they lied. The reason they didn't turn over, Bill Smith and his crew lied and said, because I had expenses dental work done. My wife and people, we have these lab reports, affidavits on these people. You would not see expenses nowhere in there. That man said he put on a cap, a crown. That's just a cement job. Because the dental gold crown that was lost, he just made another and it just slide on. He didn't have to do no drilling. He didn't have to do any of that. So there was nothing anywhere to say anything about expensive dental work was done on my mouth. Nowhere. And that's what the report say. Back to the hair, my sample, number 190, which I think I told you that I sent to you, number 190 and 191, head and pubic hair, from the GBI crime lab, stated straight up, insufficient to list similarities. And they explain what that means. They don't say match, non-match at that time. Insufficient means it's a no. Sufficient means it's a yes. And the other one just simply means we can't tell. They said no on the hair sample 190, 191. But the liars, every one of his sample matched each one of the cases, according again to the GBI, according to the Columbus police. So somebody's lying. It's not Carlton Gary. I didn't do the testing. They did the testing. Then we go to the prints, allegedly. How is it initially that your famous people, David Rice, Harold Harris, half of your police department in this thing, they get these alleged prints. They test these prints against Carlton Gary's prints. They do not match. 14 months to 2 years later, GBI come down and they match. And then they want to lie and say, we agreed to that Bud Seaman agreed to that in the court. No, Bud said, well, we're not arguing the print that they showed you might match him, but where did that print come from? GBI said, I don't know. Did you know that Harold Harris and David Rice tried to match this print and it didn't match him? So no, we didn't know that. So do you know how old this is? Don't know that. Have you been to the crime scene? I have not. And from the crime scene, there's literally, right this minute, literally hundreds of prints that's still unidentified. Who could they belong to? They excluded the victims. They excluded the friends. They excluded the family. Even workers, everybody they know, but still they unidentified. That's what George Keller said, the head guy that ran the ID division. Oh, I'm sorry. He was next to the head. You know why? Because the head guy was Eddie Florence, an African-American. They took off every African-American that worked in that department. They were their experts. They kept that department up on the latest stuff in ID. They kept them up on it. They took Eddie Florence off of there. They took all the Hardaway off of there. They took the guy off of there, and they had filed a lawsuit against that same Columbus Police Department about their racist stuff. They filed a lawsuit, 8 police, and after that, they started the African American Police Association in Columbus, Georgia. But they took a plane, they went to Washington, D.C., before the U.S. House of Congress, not Carlton Gary's House of Congress, the U.S. House of Congress, and they brought that circuit up there. They put in the death penalty statistics and showed clearly the Chattahoochee Judicial Circuit is the most racist circuit in Columbus, in Georgia. That whole circuit. It's not what I'm saying, it's statistics that prove that. So, okay, we come back to that, and we say, well, how many points? So if it's 7 points, 9 points, or whatever, but who knew? Each print on a person have the average finger got 75 to 175 points. Don't listen to Carlton Gary get the proof yourself. And all of the people, David Axball, all these people, they testify for the prosecution all of the time. They get all the books. Mike Muse and Teresa Day, I think I mentioned that to you in a letter, they put out this paper from Georgia State University. They tell in that paper how police plant prints. 5 New York State police, state troopers got service to prison for plant prints. They got several guys up there that did it in over 40 cases of plant prints up in there. But the question still came up. Well, how many people in this courtroom you think could have the same number of points on a finger alike? The answer was, it might be everybody in here. You and I might share 15 of the very same points. We might share 20 of the very same points. We're not going to share the whole print.
Right.
But then, lo and behold, we find out later. And it's not a science, number one, and they proved at the last hearing and all that, they brought this out. They have no standard. One examiner might say 1 point, that's that person. Another would say, well, I need 101. That's that person. There's no standard. So you're going as a subjective, objective thing. What are we going by here? But also, as I told you with the DNA, and please check this out, just like with DNA, in fingerprint, they have an exclusionary rule. Never heard of it in my life. An exclusionary rule is the same with the DNA. It's not how many match, it's the ones that does not match. If it does not match, that person is excluded. While on the prints, their favorite case was the Woodruff case. They said every testimony that you see, they push the fact at the point of entry. They even went beyond that and said it was found inside on the windowsill at the point of entry. We have the crime lab reports, and I have it right here on this card right this minute. The crime lab report came from George Keller, the same guy I talked about a minute ago, and the director, S.D. Wright, the director of that, they examined the scene. And guess what it says? No latents developed at the point of entry. None whatsoever. So these people purposely committed perjury. Bill Smith knew it was no press, so they had the report. Pulley knew he had the report. Julia Slater knew, the DA, she had the report. The Attorney General knew they had the report. But they allowed these people to continue to testify that my print was found at the point of entry. And then when the weak palm print come up, we put this guy again on the stand and said, well, here's the report right here. Is this yours? Yes. Does that report, and defense exhibit number 2, does that report mention that print, period? Absolutely. At all. Guess what the answer was? It's not even in the report. The lie came back that, well, the reason we didn't make a shot of it or whatever is because it was too weak. Well, if it was too weak then, how did it suddenly become strong? Because Bill Smith then said that was the print? And they went further and said, we tested the point of entry. We tested the wooden screen to the porch. We tested a peppercorn can that somebody sprinkled to throw the dogs off. There are no prints. Absolutely none. But they've been allowed to perjure themselves all of these years and tell these lies that my prints were found at the point of entry. So when the public hears that, when they hear prints, we watch TV. People automatically think that's a done deal. Mm-hmm. Nobody has ever said, well, they were points from a print, not a whole print. And from the seams, they took 6 full cards of fingerprints from the Diamondstein case. They took 8 full cards of fingerprints from the Miller case. You take a wild guess at how many of those Max Carlton gave it. Points or whole prints from the Kofa case, from the Borum case, from all of these other houses. Tell me how many of those prints Max Carlton gave it. You know how many? Between 0 and 1. Not none. How do you explain that? How do you do that? You say, okay, you say you got them. Y'all got full cards of them from the scene. On the board, on the clothes, everything else, but none of them Max Carlton gave it. But you come back 2 years later and say that, 7 points match him. We don't know because you didn't give us no money to get an expert. We didn't have nobody to say, well, okay, even if 7 did, everybody there could be 7. But if you did that, well, what about 75? And it could be 175. So what about that? No answer. And let's not forget, everybody almost to the person involved in this case, it is not a race card, as I told you in the letter. This is a fact. You all probably have that record. We do. The Big Eddie Club, the Columbus Country Club, excluded black people. Always have. Every judge, Fowler Will, Bill Smith, Slaughter, you continue on down the line. Every one of those people belong to that club. One or the other, or both. Each one of them. The DAs belong to the same racist clubs, the same people. And would add even more so, the victims, with the exception of 2, Miss Thurman and Miss Scheibel, did not belong to the clubs. Every one of the rest of them did. Them and their families, including the Swole family, who survived the unfortunate attack on her. Every one of them belongs to it. They know each other. They're friends. Every one of them belongs to the same racist club. Is it racist? Is it me saying it? Let's go back to Congress. Let's go back to what Tyrone Brooks, when the Justice Department settled that lawsuit, the Chattahoochee Judicial Circuit was in that. They declared the judgeships illegal. They were racist. So when they declared that, they just swept it up under the rug? Why didn't nobody attack that? Because if it had been the other way, they would have attacked it. As you see, they've done that. Well, we're going to have to change this thing up here because now the black people got the power to vote. Well, Kruger out of Macon, the representative is still on the floor, and he used the N-word and said, well, we need to change it because we don't want them to have this kind of vote. The other judge I had, the very first judge I had, he got on the thing, he said his hero was Hitler. The best time in the day was when he went to Nuremberg, and he spoke to Hitler. That's Robert Elliott that died. He flies the flag from the South. His boss is a Robert E. Lee. His hero is Hitler. He portrays William Charley from the My Lai massacre that killed all the innocent people over in Vietnam. And guess where he is? He lives in Columbus. William Charley. He runs BBV jewelry store down there. That's his hero. Well, the Vietnamese people were also minorities. They didn't care. They'd have been white folks. They'd have killed 100 and some white people, 200 people. He would have been all everywhere. But he was his hero also. So somebody, I'm just looking for somebody to tell me, why am I here? Footprint doesn't match. Hair does not match. Semen does not match. Bite mark does not match. Shoe size does not match. Nothing matches. So why am I here?
Why are you here? Why are you there? Why did they choose you?
Because I was not the first person. By the time they had put lives out there, and I come along, and they looked and saw this case in New York, which is similar to the case as a kid. They looked and saw that, so it was easy to go from there. I had a record. You know, it was easy to do that because, number one, the community was thirsty for somebody, as you surely must know. Before lives, they were saying that we got the guy. We think we got the guy. You know, they didn't have the guy. So you thought the community was just going to continue to sit by that? So then they wanted to build a case. But they built it on what? And I just read the 11th Circuit. The 11th Circuit sent down their ruling. And the 11th Circuit clearly said their case is weak. It's a weak case. The case weak. Yeah. That's what the 11th Circuit said. On page 20 of their ruling from November 2009, they said this, not me. So where's all this evidence that they have? Perhaps you know.
I don't know. They won't show us anything.
Ma'am? I'm sorry?
I said, I don't know. They won't show us anything.
And why not?
They're claiming that it's still, the case is still pending.
Yeah, it's still pending, all right. But other time they would have showed it to you. Because if it would work against me, I guarantee they would have showed it to you.
Right.
They would have showed it to you. There's no doubt about that. February 12, 2009, on page 22, the 11th Circuit said, quote, given the weakness of the state's evidence, that's what the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals says. So where's all this evidence?
So if the case was so weak, why didn't they grant you a new trial?
Well, because we got like-minded people. Who did it go before? We got like-minded people. I could give you a list of cases that you would have to compare. For instance, they said one guy that did the same thing. They said he can't be expected to know the law because he's a layperson. But with Carlton Gary, I'm expected to know the law. In other cases, the Georgia Supreme Court and other cases ruled one piece of document will not turn over. They let these people go. All the way down to Williams, the guy from Savannah that had the antique shop. They turned him loose. You'll find a plethora of cases like that. But when this case come along, it's a whole nother story.
So...
I was going to say, do you mind if I ask him a quick question?
Sure.
Sorry. I just, jumping in here. Carlton, this is...
Hold on a second.
Go ahead.
If you let me know I'm going to get noise, you know what I mean? If I know where they go, that's what they want me to do.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's what I'm telling you.
This is along the lines of what he just said.
Go ahead.
Carlton, it's Brendan Keefe, the chief investigator that works with Jessica.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so today the parole board hearing was closed. They didn't want the public or the media in there.
Okay.
They didn't want the public or media in the parole board hearing. The DA won't let us look at the case files from a 40-year-old case because it's still, quote-unquote, pending until you're dead, basically. Do you feel that all this is happening in the dark and that why is this happening in the dark? Why don't they want the people to see what's going on if there's nothing wrong with the case?
Thank you. Answer that question. But not only that, but listen to this. As my wife know, and I had a hearing judge join the case, I don't know anything about this. Nobody consulted me about filing anything. And this is what I want my wife to put out there tomorrow or today, or you guys put it out there. Before I went to the evidentiary hearing on the extraordinary motion, I was not contacted by the lawyer. Didn't nobody come down here to talk to me about that. I was promised when they discovered that box of stuff in Don Miller's attic, I was promised that we would do that would be brought about, and I found all these documents that said here's a guy, Gary Glenn Howard, that lived 5 steps behind Mrs. Woodruff's back door. They found stuff from her house underneath this house. His name has never showed up on a suspect list until we got these documents from the attic. I asked Jack, I said, look, we need to push this. If you let them get on that stand for 3 hours, then we got this stuff here now. We got the evidence to show that Sellers lied about he didn't know anything about the community. Here's the documents. We got the stuff to show that Eugene Romanoff confessed to 4 stranglings in the case. Why didn't we talk to these people? So it's a whole bunch of that stuff. So it's them. It's not Carlton Gary. Exactly. So understand this. I did not go. My wife is not there. She would have gone. My daughters never would have gone to the hearings. Nobody, since I had this date on me, find out how many of them came down here to talk to me. So I filed a motion in Butts County about this to stay this. I filed a motion to Clay Land down there. I filed a motion to him. You know what I mean? I said, I'm sure that the defendant's got a right to have some say in how he's defended. And they got a case in the U.S. Supreme Court now out of Louisiana where, Sotomayor and all the people say, hey, a person can talk themselves in the jail. They can talk themselves in the gas chamber, unfortunately. But that defendant got a right. So who contacted me? And I got on Jack about this. I had a hearing in Judge Jordan's chambers about this very thing, communicating. And I'm not the only client. There's another client out here, Jefferson, the same way, Laura Jefferson. Who's talking to me? Tell me something. Don't just call me on the phone and say, well, we're going to put this off and all this other thing to another day or something like that. Tell me what's going on. Nobody's done that.
So why do you think that
they're coming up? Absolutely, they're coming up. From one of their boys or 2 of their boys, they're coming up beyond the racist thing. And anybody ask that question, that's exactly what we were saying. Why? Why not? If you the one got all this stuff, why didn't you test the stuff? Why you oppose it at every level? Why didn't you give me the money? You got a fair case. Why didn't you do that? Why you lying and let people to testify permanently when you got the statement? Bill Smith also said these people were brutally beaten. Well, we got the copies of the lab reports from the GBI. It doesn't say that. We got copies of it. Contact Jenny Bullock. I think my wife got a copy of it, but if not, Jenny Bullock got a copy of it. And see what the lab reports say for yourself. See.
So I have to ask you, I don't know of any death row inmate or someone facing the death penalty who isn't going to claim some sort of either innocence or that the death penalty is the wrong sentence for their crime. Why should people listen to you?
Because they're not listening to me. I have the documents. They're listening to Dr. Thomas Day for the GBI. They listen to the lab guy that worked for the police from California. They listen to the lab guy from Alabama. They listen to the Boulder lab from Virginia. They listen to everybody but Carter Gary, including the GBI. It's not me saying it. That's why they should, because it's not me talking. Other people might talk, but we have the documents. We got their reports. So it's not listening to me saying I'm answering everything, but it's the lab report. It's the facts. Exactly what he asked earlier. Well, why would they do that? Why would they not come out there with these facts? Why would they oppose all this stuff? Exactly. That's my point. Why would they? Listen, can y'all stay here for a minute? Because these people are about to have a heart attack for me to go around this corner around here, and I can come back and call y'all in maybe 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, let me go out here because they about to get on my nerve. You know what I mean?
Okay.
All right, I'll call y'all back in about 5-10 minutes, so it shouldn't take that long.
All right. We'll talk to you soon.
You on the phone?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, I'll call you back in a few.
Okay.
I'm going to cut you short.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't know they were going to look through my property,
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, they so slick.
They are slick.
Oh, they slick. You just don't have an idea. I know a lot of public doesn't care about people in prison, but that's why they keep having a lot of these problems out there, because nobody's trying to correct that. So when people get out of here, they're angry. They're very mad. And you should see it down here. You understand you're in prison. It's not a hotel or a resort, but the stuff they do, you don't have to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're still human.
Well, we be without heat for years, over a year. Cool freezing, no heat. Now we got too much goddamn heat. It's just a bunch of crap. Stuff that you should do, they don't do. As soon as they took the hands off of the federal judge, took the hands off of it, they went back to primitive days. You can do your job, keep people here and all that. That's cool. But that above and beyond stuff is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And public don't care. That's not new until it hit home. And then they like, oh, Lord. Yeah, that recidivism rate is terrible. But,
1 sec for your question. Okay, we're good.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, question or somebody?
Yep, I'm going to ask you some more questions. And I'm going to ask you a couple that are just kind of point blank, and it's because, we already know your answer based on everything you've already said, but I want to ask the questions.
Sure.
You're on death row right now for the rape and murder of 3 women.
Right.
And you're known as the Columbus Stocking Strangler.
That's some folks.
Did you rape those women?
Absolutely not.
Did you kill those women?
Absolutely not.
Did you have any knowledge or anything to do with their murders?
Absolutely not. This is a story that they told. Again, not recorded, not signed, not initialed by anybody, which the lights should go off. There's been many cases reversed on that where they didn't have that.
What are your thoughts on the witness who was not able to identify you until 7 years later?
You mean his woman?
Mm-hmm.
It was 2. It was 2. You mean you talking about Laufenberg and Nelson? Sue Nelson and some Laufenberg.
The one who told police initially that she couldn't identify you because it was dark in the room, and then 7 years later was the one.
Oh, you mean Miller?
Yeah, who testified.
What I feel about that is sorrow. My wife and I have talked about this long before you guys come on the scene, and I've often told lawyers and everybody that is, you want to talk about an injustice to the way Bill Smith and those people down there, those demons did that woman. They made that woman lie, because if you look at, I just finished the hypnosis interview. She had 2. She given, as you know, many different reports, including many different composites that non-match me and all of that stuff. And you won't see anything about her being choked or anything about anything hand around her throat or any stocking until you read this report where Bill Smith, Ricky Bora, and Doug Pullen went to that woman's house later years. That's when she changed her story. Again, don't listen to Carl and Gary. Let's get the proof of it. I have a record. They have a record of the hypnotism thing. Jack Martin, all of them have a record. They clearly asked her repeatedly, did anything else happen? No. Was it any other kind of sex? No. Got in court, she tried to change this to anal sex, but we put the doctor's statement said there was none of that. And then they said, that's when she changed her story and went to them, and she said, yeah, he tried to put the stocking around my throat. But look at the reports and see, and that's exactly what they said. As everything else I'm off, and I don't ask anybody to believe me at all. I'm just amazed that people hadn't gotten these documents. I know you guys say y'all tried to get some of these documents, but we have a lot of them, and they say exactly what I'm telling you. She given many different statements. The room was dark. The person went from the top of the lamp, which they measured that. That meant that person was been about 5'4", 5'6". She went from complexion to she could not identify Now, what did that sound like? But I was so upset because they did that poor woman wrong.
Yeah.
That woman did not know what was going on. She did not have a clue as to what happened. And when you saw me on TV surrounded by, again, all of these Caucasian police, because they got rid of all of the African Americans, so I'm surrounded by them, and they identified me, as you just said, as the so-called Saudi Strangler. She's still waiting 27 more days before she reported this. Then the story was that she said immediately, but it was 27 days later, so in the report it was asked the question, well, why did you not go? She said, well, I thought that somebody from their department would contact me. Now, who is it that see that person on TV? That's the first thing you're going to do. You're going to scream bloody murder. Somebody, you're going to call the police. That's him.
Right.
And so, and when you ask Bill Smith about that identification, when you ask him about Laufenberg identification later, when you ask him about Sue Nelson so-called identification years later, you first saw me, you was frightened. You were so afraid, me and another guy, allegedly. You told the person you was with, you were so afraid. You did not call the police. You went home. You allegedly saw this person a little while later in the vicinity. You were still afraid. You did not call the police. Laufenberg, you changed your story. Everything about that. In a few seconds, your story changed. You glimpsed this person. And there's no secret about, I mean, it's a cliche a lot of people use, all black people look alike, but court cases clearly say, U.S. Supreme Court on down clearly say, that's one of the most wrong forms of identification, not only eyewitness identification in the Georgia Supreme Court in several cases up there, but also U.S. Supreme Court within a little bit of time. But here it is, you're talking about almost 8 years later in a cross-race identification.
Do you feel like Miss Miller was kind of the police's Hail Mary since the DNA and everything was kind of falling apart for them?
Absolutely, no doubt. The story changed. If you get the filings, you see their story changed. When they saw this man was going the other way, the story changed to say, well, if he didn't do it, he was present. Why did you change that story? It also changed from if he's guilty of one, he's guilty of all. But if he's not guilty of one, does that mean he's not guilty of all? Well, why doesn't it work both ways? Of course they did that to that lady. That's the worst thing that could have happened. They just abused that woman, and then she would be locked up for that, honestly. And I'm not just telling you that. You might say that's my wife, but she's not just going to agree with anything. I promise you that. And I told lawyers that as well, and other people. So that's what bothered me the most, because they just used that poor woman.
Yeah.
That woman didn't know what she was talking about. But you get the reports, which I have, this should have been earlier, and you could have had the report yourself. You saw that, so okay, here it is. These officers talked to her. She didn't say anything about nobody trying to choke her. Nothing. Oh, but here when the DA go, when the assistant DA go, when one of the detectives that arrested him go, the story changes. Wow. And let's not forget, these black women that was raped and beat before her, when Miller and these people, the Don Miller and the other police went, I got a paper here. It's got this lady, Arena Walker, is her name, one of the black females that got raped a few days before Miss Miller. You're talking maybe 8-9 days before Miss Miller. And before that, Deborah Talbot Houston, another black female, got raped, and 2 more. In court, we asked for those records. Of course, Father Will, being the racist he is and belonging to the same club as Bill Smith and all of them, when they objected, of course, he going with them. It got so bad in the courtroom, if you look at the record, I had the whole courtroom laughing, because when the lawyer Bud and them would put on something to ask a question, I would simply say, denied. In the courtroom, bust out laughing, because that's how ridiculous it was that he was denying us all this stuff when the court cases clearly say, I had a right to funds, I had a right to these experts, and this school was going to say, well, yeah, you got a right to it, but we're not going to pay for it. Well, I'm poor.
I want to ask you, because you've said more than once, you're not pulling the race card in this.
Absolutely not.
But I do want to you to take me back to what Columbus was like in the 1970s and 80s, around the times, that these women were getting killed, and then when you were getting arrested for it.
Well, I mean, I didn't get back to Columbus till late 70s. But no further than, when I was a child, my wife and I, we were insulated from that. We had our own neighborhoods. We had our own cleaners. We had our own grocery stores. We had our own schools. So we didn't have any of that. That stuff didn't affect me at all, although people had spread stories about that. But we weren't affected by that. We had our own everything, and we were content. It's just when the white people came in the neighborhood, if you walked, they were sicking dogs on people. This is a known fact. So it is not a race card. It's just a fact. How would it be a race card when every one of these people belong to the Big Eddie Club?
Right.
Several of them belong to the country club. They just started putting black people in there when they got exposed. You want to call Calvin Smiley or somebody to help them to join. His people down there, affluent black people, didn't even know them people existed. So when I got in the 70s, it was not a problem with me because, I carried my own. And I wasn't mingling with these people. I was on television. I was modeling. I was selling clothes. I was doing these things. So it wasn't a problem with me. I never had a problem with white folks. I had male and female white friends. The police went behind my back to talk to every female almost that I was associated with to see if I was gay, to see what kind of kinky sexual habits I had. Lo and behold, nobody, they couldn't come up with anything. So that story changed. Then we looked at the age range of the females that I was with. That doesn't fit that. I fit none of the profile, and according to the so-called experts, serial killers kill within their race. I'm a long way from Caucasian, I think.
What?
But so I was not affected in the 80s. I was there for a minute, but even back in the day, it didn't bother us because it didn't matter what color you were. If you got out of line, disrespected our people or whatever, then we took care of that. Simple as that.
Right.
Yeah.
No,
it didn't affect me.
What is maybe one thing that you want people to know about you, to take away from this conversation, if nothing else? What do you want people to know about Carlton Gary?
Well, the only thing I want anybody to know about Carlton Gary is the truth. And Jack Martin once said it in the paper. He said it to a million people before. Anybody can be skeptical. So, well, you talk to this guy. Talk to him. Look at him. See what you come away with. Is he fronting? Is he faking? What you're going to find is that I don't know that. Even with my wife, she'll tell you this. She may not like some of the things. My daughters, they may not like that. But I'm going to tell it to you straight. Like it or not. And that's the one thing that nobody can, even people here, same way. And a lot of conversation I start with these people say, you may not like this because I'm telling you the truth, but I'm just going to tell it to you. Just like a few minutes ago when I paused on this phone. I had to square off on these fools out here. So, I'm talking about this stuff with my life, man. You think I got time to be probably dealing with y'all lunatics?
Right.
So I just deal straight with that. So the only thing I want them to know is you got me wrong. The lies and stuff that they were talking about, I don't do that. I don't do it. You're not going to find anybody that say that. If I ran into, even to the female, there's not a female I run into that I'm going to say, I didn't tell her. I said, listen, we're not exclusive. If we were, then I wouldn't have these other females. So are you able to deal with this or whatever? My wife already know about all this stuff. So I said, but are you, okay, I can handle it. So later, if we decide to have sex or anything, and you find out about another woman, why are you going to get angry? I told you this from the beginning.
Right.
When I met women and people in the street, male and female, if we was going to have any kind of relationship, I would let them know, look, I got a record. I've been arrested before. But in all of the robberies that they attribute to me, with all of this power in my hand, which blood brought out, why didn't I hurt somebody? Did I kidnap a woman? Did I rape a woman? Let's look at these cases that happened today, which actually, and my wife family, we talked about this many times, and it may sound so hard to you, but it's insult me when I see these cats today. They run in there and shoot these people, kill them, 50 cents, nothing. Shoot them because they looked at them wrong. You heard the adage of honor among thieves, but I just never like that. Never did. I want to know, like, what's the truth of this guy? What is it? It's just straight. That's all. Because people are going to talk. It doesn't matter how good you are to people. They're going to talk about it in here or out there.
Right.
It doesn't matter how a lot of people might be good to you. Some people are going to appreciate it. Some people are not going to appreciate it in here and outside. So it's the person. But the one thing I tell people, I tell them this, look, you got me wrong, like medication, whatever. Let me see you out there. I don't play no games. You better ask somebody about me. I don't do that. I don't play no games at all. I'm just straight up.
I mean, you've never denied being a criminal. You just, yeah.
No, and still don't. I don't apologize to nobody for any of that. They wrote me up one time as a modern day Robin Hood, and I said, well, call it what you want. But you're not giving these people what they should have. Why is the so-called United States of America, why we got all these poor people suffering like this? Why we got people going through stuff and babies and stuff they ain't being fed? Why we going through this? Boy, you guys, y'all throw in $100,000 raise for you, but you want to phase in 10 cents for poor people over 25,000 years. You want to give them 10 cents, but you want to get $100,000 raise right now for you. You already got it. So what you worried about health care for? What kind of health care does your mama have? Your wife have? What kind of health care you got? What about these poor people? So why should you care? They put you in office, you don't care what you care about. So no, I never apologize for any of my robberies. Any of that stuff I did, never ever did it because I didn't do anything. It's wrong to rob. Don't misunderstand that.
Right.
And I tell my wife all the time, I never took no glory up. I didn't strut. You know, it wasn't a big deal, anything like that. It was wrong, absolutely. But people never talk about, well, look, how many jobs did this guy have? You hadn't asked it, nobody else asked that. So wait a minute, did he ever have any legitimate jobs? All we know about is crime. That's all we want to talk about is crime. Well, what about the jobs there? Oh, he worked in the bank. He worked in the hospital. He worked here, he worked there, he went to school, he did, oh, well, those kind of stories don't sell. They don't tell well. You got to have that sensationalism. And that's just a known fact. So, no, I did my robberies, I did those things that were done, but I had stopped those activities before this.
Right.
Okay.
Right. I wanted to ask you a few questions pertaining to tomorrow. If things don't turn out the way that you're hoping and the execution does happen, what are your feelings about that?
Hold on one second.
Hang on.
You got to hit maybe end on that other call or something?
It might end that call.
Yeah, it might end that one.
Oh, no, yeah, you don't want to do that.
Okay.
You're on speaker now? Hold on.
Okay.
All right,
Here we go.
You're back.
Sorry, we lost you on speaker for a second. So I was asking, what are your thoughts on that?
I have no thoughts on that because, you know, I trust in God Almighty. You know, I have no thoughts that I understand how these courts work and all that stuff, but we've gone through this before and we don't think along those lines. You know, I understand the realism that's going on, but I also understand that according to the good book that tells me that was Hebrew boys thrown into the fire, but they come out. I've heard about seeds that's been parted. I've heard about water being turned into wine. I've heard about thousands of people being fed with just a few drops of stuff out of the sky. I've heard about these things. And I've had a God that's brought me all over, Okay.
What's that?
I got a call from Michael. Y'all want to let me get this call and I'll call y'all back? Oh, y'all got to go or what?
I think I just have maybe one more question. Do you have time for that?
Okay.
How are you going to spend tomorrow?
I spend every day, you know, thanking God first thing in the morning, you know, and thinking about my wife and just waiting for them to say, well, okay, you can go back.
Wow. How are you holding it together?
What do you mean, how?
No, just like, we're talking, I don't want to state the obvious, but this is hours from a scheduled execution. How are you holding it together?
Well, I mean, we've gone through this before, and, you know, we've gone through court things where we didn't know who was going to represent me, what we was going to do, and on the ride down, God said, don't worry about that. You know, peace be still, I got you. Taking no heed going to wear, what you're going to say, because I got you there. And just like this, I just prepare for it. I read it. I know what's facing on it, but I do not let it bother me. Because I trust in God. I take it to him in prayer. So I stay prayed up. My wife stayed prayed up. And that's a great one. I'm telling you this. Although he's gone through, I've done some things that have not been cool. And, but she's still great. I promise you that. Quite unique. In almost 40 years, she's still right here with her husband. Because you know why? The same thing I just told you. She trusts in that same God. Mm-hmm. That God delivered that for her, irregardless of anything else, but I know in my words or whatever, and I actually draw for her faith. Even when she's down and feeling bad, she still got that same faith.
That's so sweet.
That's just the truth.
Do you wish she could be there with you?
Absolutely. I do too. Hello?
Yes.
Oh, we're here.
We're here.
Okay, listen.
Yeah, you have to go.
Yeah, I take this call from Michael.
Okay.
And, like I said, I could call y'all back, but if you straight on that, I just pray that y'all will get this out there in time and let these people know what's going on, and that you consistently do this thing within. We only, like you said, we got a few hours, so the public needs to do this because there's stress out there like that.
Right. And you're gonna call me back later, correct?
Yes, dear.
Okay, dear.
Is there anything else that you want to say?
Not really. I just appreciate all the people that's standing and people that can see through all this stuff. I really appreciate the efforts now. Thank God for all the prayers,
All right. Well, okay. if you get off your phone call within the next 10 or 15 minutes, feel free to give us a call back. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to talk to Deborah for a little bit. So we'll still be here. So feel free to call back.
I can do that.
All right. Thanks.
All right. Love you. You too.
All right. Talk to you in a few.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Also breaking in the last half hour, a convicted serial killer put to death inside the state prison in Jackson, but not before Carlton Gary gave his very last recorded statement only to 11 Alive. Chief Investigator Brendan Keefe is live now outside the prison with much more on the convicted stocking strangler's last words. Brendan?
That's right, Vinny. Carlton Gary was executed by lethal injection tonight at 10:33 p.m., but there was one witness who was scheduled to be there who was not there. 11 Alive investigative journalist for 11alive.com, Jessica Knoll. She was booted off the prison grounds here simply because she agreed to accept a phone call interview with the condemned man hours before his execution.
I'm an innocent person.
Carlton Gary will forever be known as the Columbus Stocking Strangler, but he died proclaiming his innocence.
From the very beginning, this thing has just been one-sided.
The condemned man chose 11alive.com investigator Jessica Knoll to record his final thoughts in a phone call just hours before his scheduled execution. Carlton Gary was arrested back in 1984. He thought it was for a series of armed robberies, not a series of murders.
That's why I'm smiling in the very first photo. People see me coming down the hall with the red sleeveless top on. They thinking I've lost my mind because I'm accused of these cases, but I'm smiling. Well, I'm smiling because I don't know I'm accused of these cases.
Under the authority of Georgia law, we have the right, of course, to close this meeting.
The Georgia Parole Board denied clemency, but heard testimony in secret the day before the scheduled execution. Journalist Jessica Knoll was taken off the execution witness list and ordered off prison property once the Department of Corrections learned Gary had called us from death row.
They didn't want the public or media in the parole board hearing. The DA won't let us look at the case files from a 40-year-old case because it's still, quote-unquote, pending until you're dead. Why is this happening in the dark? Why don't they want the people to see what's going on if there's nothing wrong with the case?
Thank you. Answer that question.
Carlton Gary will never hear the answer.
The execution of Carlton Michael Gary was carried out at 10:33 p.m. in accordance of state law. He did not accept a final prayer and did not make a final statement.
Now, you may ask why we talked only with the convicted serial killer and not with the victims' families. It's important to point out there were no victims' families present for tonight's execution. These crimes happened 4 decades ago. There certainly is another side. And remember, he was convicted and his appeals were denied. just as recently as tonight when the U.S. Supreme Court denied to give him a stay. That's why it happened so late at 10:33 instead of at 7. We will be asking first thing in the morning D.A. Slater for those records that she has kept closed and her predecessors now for 4 decades. And we'll finally, hopefully, see the evidence. We're live in Jackson.
Did you kill those women?
Absolutely not.
Did you have any knowledge or anything to do with their murders?
Absolutely not.
You can listen to our entire exclusive interview with Carlton Gary and his wife in the final few hours of his life right now on 11alive.com. We've also posted background and historical footage from the Stocking Strangler case.